Hey there, heroic minds. It's your buddy Chronos back with another mind-blowing installment of What If. Today, we're diving headfirst into the thrilling world of What If Deku had matter manipulation, Part 2. I gotta say, the response from all you awesome viewers has been absolutely incredible, and I can't thank you enough for your continued support. But hey, let's keep the momentum going. Before we kick things off, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring that bell so you never miss out on our wild theories. Alright, enough chit-chat. Let's dive into the action. Chapter 6. From the desk of Toshinori Yagi. There have been times in my years that I have witnessed true darkness and blinding light. I have waded through the abyss of this world and basked in the light, even emanating my own light to warm the fragile souls of those who felt the world was too dark to live in. In the years since my battle with the devil of this world, all for one, I felt as if the world became brighter. The sun shone brightly, and the warmth it sent to the people was enough that I noticed more smiles, people helping others out of goodness rather than obligation. It warmed a hardened and tired soul to see. But as they became more at peace and happy, my ever-ailing body pulled me deeper into my own darkness. No longer was I able to eat normally, no longer did breathing feel normal. No longer was I able to walk in public without the feeling of pity being aimed at my back and with the ever-looming knowledge that I would have to pass on my quirk in my mind. I knew that an obscure and solemn retirement was coming closer. That is if Mirai's prediction doesn't come to pass first. And it's true there were times I would have welcomed a climactic end to my story, to finish the tale of All Might in a grandiose fashion and meet my beloved master in the afterlife. But that changed several months ago, when I met a curious boy with amazing ambitions and a quirk to match. Young Midoriya Izuku did what no one since my master could do. He restored my hope. It has been 3 months since my procedure when he repaired my respiratory system and healed the scarring from dozens of surgeries. I can breathe again. I can fight again. I can feel the brightness of the sun and smile fully again. While not perfect, as I haven't been able to eat a cheeseburger in years, I am able to look to a tomorrow where I don't have any pain in my day, where I can retire happily and live to see my successor flourish. That is if Mirai's prediction doesn't come to pass first. I have met with young Midoriya several times since my procedure, and while never for more than an hour or so I have learned a lot about the boy. He is a thinker rather than a fighter, more inclined to win the fight before it began than during. That being said, he knows how to brawl. Gave this old man a couple punches that were more than just a tickle. He has a good heart, something that is key for me when looking for a successor. He offered assistance without hesitation the day we met. While I do acknowledge that his fanboy nature might have influenced his readiness to divulge his, at the time highly secret, quirk and capabilities, I have a feeling that he would have done it regardless if it were something only he could do. My thoughts were reaffirmed during the entrance exam. Young Midoriya ran towards danger, weaving in and out of promising hero candidates that were fleeing the scene to save someone from simulated danger. I knew then and there that his potential went from something to keep my eye on to someone who made the list of potential successors. Speaking of the list, there is young Togata. He is so much like me I would have thought we were related. Mirai's fanboy nature was truly shining bright when he presented me with Togata as a potential candidate for One for All. He is experienced, heroic, and emanates a light that can ease the hearts of those around him. Truly a fine candidate. Unfortunately, I haven't had as much time with young Togata as I did with young Midoriya, as I wanted to assist young Midoriya in his training to enter UA as part of my gratitude for healing me. But in the coming weeks I will be teaching at UA, and in that time, I can further assess young Midoriya and young Togata. Truly I know One for All will be in good hands with either of them, but I don't want to rush such an important decision. I also pledge to be a good mentor and teacher to my students like my master was to me, so that I may see them become the pro heroes I know they have the potential to be. That is if Mirai's prediction doesn't come to pass first. But I shouldn't think of that. I want to see young Midoriya's performance in Aizawa's quirk apprehension test, which is starting any minute. From the desk of Shota Aizawa. The first days of a new year always make me melancholic. I have been an underground hero ever since 2 weeks after my graduation from UA till now. I started with a laptop, my support gear and the occasional assistance from friends in the police force. It took a day to see a sexual assault that was seconds away from tragedy. It took 3 days to come across a mutilated body, a victim of a villain that was flexing his quirk. It took a month to lose a friend to another villain. I have scars on my body from mistakes, I have scars from failures, and I have never wanted them removed because they remind me of the most important truth of this line of work. Hero work is dangerous. I'm a tough teacher and I will never not be. It is cruel to destroy dreams, but I'd rather them fail here than out there. At least here, no one dies for real. Although, after seeing the potential of this new class, even I have to admit that there is no one that I feel shouldn't be a hero. If only Emmy could hear me say that, she'd think I was going soft. Then she'd propose again, and I'd say no again. Then I'd feel bad again and move that dial in my head towards saying yes, just a tiny bit. So far, I'm at 17.5 out of 100 on the scale of saying yes. Imagine my shock at her slow but sure success at whittling me down. Hisashi must never know. Back to my class, there were standouts in good ways and bad ways. First that comes to mind is Todoroki Shoto. He possesses the most raw power in the class at this point. He can make massive amounts of ice in an instant, and seems to have precise control on top of that. Speaks of years of training, good on him to not rely on power and coast through his training. Endeavor's son or not, if he had been, I would have cut him to the curb. However, his file labels his quirk as half hot, half cold. Which leads me to believe that he has fire as well. Which he should, as son to the man with arguably the strongest fire in the country. It would be odd if he didn't. But he didn't use it, and I will find out why. Is he not confident in controlling his fire? If that is the case, then it is admirable to hold back to not risk injuring his classmates, and I would commend him for it. Is he holding back for some other reason? Again, unclear, but I will find out. He needs to use every tool at his disposal, otherwise he will suffer. Why? Hero work is dangerous. Second to stand out is Bakugo Katsuki. An interesting one. Labeled a genius, and his scores show a high intelligence, and he is the second in terms of pure power. He has a determination that is rare to see and the same ambition of every hero student to be number one, but there is a drive that makes me look at him and think he could have a shot. But that attitude and demeanor of his is quite shocking. He is more abrasive and cruder than his file would suggest, and while I don't care how he talks, it is curious. He has an existing relationship with Midoriya Izuku that would suggest enemy or rival, and today was a blow that could break him, or make him even stronger. Only time will tell. Third standout, Midoriya Izuku. I had my eye on this one since a few months ago, where the staff witnessed him do what no other could. Heal All Might. He is a genius, and it shows in his scores and use of his quirk, one that makes even my head spin at the complexity of it. When I first learned of it, I felt pity at the sheer difficulty of mastering such an ability. But seeing him today and listening to him and Yaoyorozu shoot their capabilities back and forth, I'm interested to see where he goes and how high he can climb. The three I saw stand out today will be put through the toughest training I can think of, as they have the potential that I refuse to squander. If they break and fail, all the better. Better now than in the field, so they don't die or fail in a way that makes them wish they had. Hero work is dangerous. Not just physically, but mentally as well. After all, I haven't had a good night's sleep in about 13 years. About 2 weeks since I graduated. When I pictured UA, I somehow forgot it was, at its core, high school. Mused Izuku as he walked into UA for the first day of his second week. After the exciting and stressful first day, nothing special had happened since. They had orientation the first days with all 7 of their core classes, except for Foundational Hero Studies, which was today. Math, science, literature, foreign language, all standard classes that even UA taught alongside their core heroic classes. Izuku had to sit through lectures and complete homework just like middle school, while more difficult and tedious. He had several phone calls and text chains from Uraraka and Kaminari to help them with their studies. In fact, after class he would meet with both of them sometimes to help with homework. Only 3 days into class and he was already getting bogged down with work from all of his instructors. Walking into class he heard the ongoing conversation. "I'm just saying that they can take it easy with all the calculus," moaned Shidomina, the pink-skinned girl that Izuku found to be a fun, outgoing girl he never have the confidence to talk to. Kaminari nodded in agreement. "Tell me about it. If it weren't for Midoriya, I'd already be behind." "You're already getting help from someone? A week in?" asked the purple-haired girl, Jiro Kyoka, a generally laid-back girl in Izuku's opinion, with a laugh. Izuku felt the need to defend Kaminari. "Don't let him fool you. Without me he'd be doing all right." He got a grateful look from Kaminari and a considering one from the 2 girls. "He just gets overwhelmed by the amount and asks for help." "Exactly," added Kaminari with a smile and a nod. "I've never struggled with school before. It's just that UA has so much high-level work that it's nerve-wracking." "That I understand," Jiro agreed. "It's because they focus so much time into heroics that normal high school classes are accelerated to compensate. We're probably a week ahead of normal schools for our core classes. Ashido's head dropped. Which is just mad aggravating. I've always been a good student, but I just can't see myself doing better than alright at this level. Izuku tried to reassure her. Well, the good thing is that you've already been accepted into UA, and as long as you don't fail, you'll be fine. That doesn't help, Midoriya, she shouted with comical tears streaming down her face. Right as he was about to respond, Aizawa came into class with his perpetually tired aura around him. The class noticed, and after their first week of classes knew that they needed to quickly and quietly get into their seats. Good, grunted Aizawa as he wrote on the board. Today will be a bit different than the rest of the week, as you will have a single class taking up most of the day, he said as he gestured to the board. Foundational Heroes Studies. Mutters from the class was halted by a glare from Aizawa. I expect all of you to give this your all. Failure to do so will see you out of this program. With those ominous words said, Aizawa moved to the corner of the room and promptly fell asleep. Midoriya chuckled to himself as his homeroom teacher battled exhaustion just to threaten them. Wonder who's going to be our instructor? Kaminari asked aloud. Jiro turned to him. Likely a pro, but all the teachers are pros, so that doesn't really narrow it down, she said with a shrug. Ashido wiggled in her seat. I'm totally nervous. What if they're a hard ass like Aizawa? She asked frantically. Kirishima laughed at that. I'm sure it will be alright. The door slid open, and before any of the students could comprehend what happened, All Might was standing in front of them with his full hero costume and a beaming grin. Izuku, having met with and trained with the hero in the past, was used to the sheer absurdity of his physical abilities and wasn't taken too off guard. The rest of the class, however. He just appeared! Uraraka shouted in shock. How is he that fast? The normally controlled Ida balked. Bakugo leaned forward with a grin. That's what the #1 hero is capable of, huh? I didn't expect any less. The rest of the class wasn't faring much better, torn between silent shock and incoherent murmuring. It took a few moments before the class settled. Aizawa, who had been forgotten from his place in the corner, sighed tiredly. Focus, snapped Aizawa. This is a good lesson. Maintaining control while surprised or scared is a key skill for any pro hero. Now continue, All Might. All Might in typical fashion laughed off the students' reactions and Aizawa's comments. Thank you, Aizawa. Students, we have much to do today. I originally intended for this class to be taught by just myself, but I have invited your homeroom teacher to join us, he said while gesturing to the hero in question. Aizawa merely sipped from a juice box he pulled from his sleeping bag, fully content to ignore All Might. All Might continued quickly. You learned on your first day what your quirks are fully capable of at the moment. So today we're going to build off that and learn what you're capable of in combat. The class perked up after hearing that. Is it going to be a battle royal? Shouted Kirishima with a large grin. Mineta started to sweat after hearing that. Wouldn't that just let Todoroki or Bakugo win it easy? Can we kill each other? Bakugo asked with a large grin. Uraraka timidly raised her hand. Is there a risk of expulsion like last time? They were silenced by a loud clap from All Might. That was a lot of questions. I can't answer them all if you don't give me a chance. He laughed. Now this isn't a battle royal. I will explain more once we get to the training facility. For now, I want everyone to go to their designated locker and gear up. Then we'll go to our training site. Izuku got up from his chair and reached out for his locker with his quirk, which caused him to grunt in annoyance. His locker weighed over 9 kilograms, making it impossible for him to lift, so with a sigh he waited his turn, then followed the rest of the guys to the locker room to change. While the guys were chatting and changing, Izuku was looking over his outfit with a satisfied smile. It was the perfect costume. It started with a tight dark green and black bodysuit that covered from halfway up his neck to his ankles, with padding on key areas like his stomach, chest, shoulders, shins, and elbows. He wore bright red boots, and over his hands were red gloves that had hardened pads over his knuckles, fingers, and up his forearm. On top of his bodysuit was a heavy piece of body armor that covered his shoulders, sides of his neck, chest, stomach, and back. On the center of the chest piece was a design for a simple atom to be his emblem. I like the look of this all right. Izuku grinned to himself while making a fist. Before he set aside the box that contained his suit, he saw a small box at the bottom with a note on the top. You didn't have anything labeled for your face. So, we decided to add this. Hope you like it. Design team. Izuku opened the box, and lying inside was a pair of dark glasses that were nearly impossible to see through from the outside. Putting them on, he was hit with a small burst of light before his eyes focused, and he recognized screens on the lenses. The screen read, rapidly adapting light shields with a description stating that the glasses' tint reacts to the brightness of the environment to give the wearer perfect vision, while obscuring the identity of the wearer. Izuku grinned. They're perfect. I didn't know I was missing something like this till I got it. Even though to the outside they were pitch dark tint glasses, he could see perfectly in the low light of the locker room. Whoa, look at you! Kaminari commented with a grin. Look ready for battle, those are some killer shades, seems we had the same idea. Looking over, Izuku noticed the same type of glasses on his face. The rest of his costume was an insulated black jacket and form-fitting pants with lightning bolt designs running up the sides. Overall, it fit his motif quite well. Not too bad yourself, Kaminari, Izuku said with a smile. Ready to kick some butt? Kaminari grinned. You know it. They were all led to Training Ground Beta, which was a massive city that was several square blocks. The roads, intersections, and buildings were all perfectly replicated from actual cities for proper simulations. They were led to a large building and into a room with a bunch of monitors. Aizawa was seated in a chair in front of the monitors, looking both bored and exhilarated. Izuku noted that all the costumes seemed to hint at or blatantly reveal the nature of the quirks of his classmates. He did, however, completely avoid looking at Yaoyorozu for too long. Izuku may understand why it was necessary, but that much skin was too much for him at this point. He elbowed Kaminari, who was busy drooling at their female classmates. Pay attention, he grunted. Sorry, Kaminari said with a laugh. Now, you wonderful youngsters, said All Might. This is going to be a series of 2-on-2 battles. The teams are already decided, so I will announce them in a moment. The purpose of this battle is to simulate a real hero scenario. The objective is to either protect or to retrieve. To each side, the opposite can be called the villain. One side is to protect a precious item from being stolen, while the other is to retrieve a very dangerous item from the wrong hands. One team will begin inside the building and given time to prepare, while the other is going to wait outside till the start. To win, the raiding team merely needs to touch the object, while the home team needs to hold off the other team for the full 5 minutes or capture the attackers. Aizawa typed into the keyboard in front of the monitors and pulled up a live feed of all the rooms in the building they were going to be training in. The first battle will be Bakugo Katsuki and Todoroki Shoto as the defending team versus Midoriya Izuku and Kaminari Denki as the raiding team, announced All Might. Defending team, go and get into position. Raiding team, wait outside the building. I will announce when the battle starts. Momo quickly rushed over with Uraraka right next to her. Good luck, Midoriya. Todoroki is really strong. He was at the recommendation exam with me. You can do it, Izuku, cheered Uraraka with a raised fist. Kaminari let out a sigh. What am I, invisible? Oh, my apologies, Momo said quickly. Good luck to you as well, Kaminari, she said with a polite smile. Yep. You can do it. Uraraka cheered again. Thanks, both of you, said Izuku with a grin, while Kaminari was on cloud 9 from both attractive girls giving him that small bit of attention. They're so nice, said Kaminari with a dreamy look on his face. Momo is so dignified, but that costume! While Uraraka is so cute, but that costume! Izuku nodded silently. Momo was in a very revealing red unitard with the middle mostly gone, while Uraraka was in a skin-tight purple bodysuit that showed her figure quite nicely. He had to mental prepare for when he was supposed to speak, otherwise, he would have stuttered from just looking at them. Arriving in front of the building that their battle training was to take place, both boys got serious. Any ideas? You know Bakugo better than I do, asked Kaminari. He's going to want to take me on right away, said Izuku with a sigh. I would want us to rush the package quickly. I'd be the distraction while you speed and then leave. But it may not work out that way. Right, so he uses explosions, right? asked Kaminari. Yes, he can create explosions using the sweat he generates on his palms. The faster he fires, the less powerful, since he can't build up power. But he can make some monstrously powerful blasts if he builds up for a bit. But that isn't all. Todoroki can create vast amounts of ice, and since he's the son of Endeavor, I wouldn't be shocked if he could make fire too. Man, why do we have to get the tough ones right off the bat? Whined Kaminari while throwing his hands up. So it will be 2 1-on-1 fights rather than a 2v2. A loud horn sounded throughout the area, followed by Begin! Izuku rushed forward and kicked the door down. For now, let's just proceed and play it by ear. Got it! After 10 steps into the building, the entire area became cold, and in the next instant both Izuku and Kaminari were frozen to the ground. Izuku grunted before kicking himself free while Kaminari flooded his body with lightning, causing heat ice to shatter around him. "Well, that was something," commented Kaminari with a groan, his breath visible in the cold atmosphere. Izuku took a breath and slowly manipulated the ice around him. He could only go 5 kilograms at a time, but after a minute or so the entire area that he was able to control with his quirk was completely void of ice or water. "Water in all its forms were among the first things I learned to manipulate," explained Izuku to the surprised Kaminari. "We'll have to stick together, or the ice could overwhelm you if you aren't careful." "He can't throw attacks like that around constantly," said Kaminari. "Doesn't matter what quirk you have, there is always a point that you can't use it anymore, and I have to believe that he can't just freeze the building over and over." "Who knows?" responded Izuku with a shrug. He had quite a bit of stamina with his quirk, so he wouldn't hold out on someone like Todoroki having a small tank. Making their way through the building, they arrived at the second floor to the sounds of shouting. "You better not pull that crap again. Deku's mine!" shouted Bakugo. He was standing at the end of the hallway, putting his finger to his ear, clearly in an argument with Todoroki about the ice. "We can capture him while he's distracted, tag team him, or split up," proposed Izuku. Kaminari frowned in thought. "Fighting Todoroki one-on-one will be tough, then again both of them are tough. But I think you should let me fight Bakugo and you take Todoroki. His ice is useless against you. I would get overwhelmed after a few attacks." "Then you attack, then I'll rush forward." Not needing more planning, Kaminari rushed forward, getting the attention of Bakugo, who glared at him but rushed forward with a trail of explosions. "I was waiting for DKU, but you'll do for now." Kaminari let Bakugo swing first, and with hundreds of spars worth of experience, he was able to flow around the hit and counter with a strong lightning-infused uppercut that stunned Bakugo enough that Izuku was able to rush past them to the stairs. Over a year at Fight Dojo taught Kaminari many things. Taught him patience, taught him to understand his quirk, taught him the skill of analyzing his opponent and strategizing in moments. He had over 250 fights with only 47 loses. Despite losing to Midoriya twice, Kaminari was regarded as a combat powerhouse thanks to his quirk's synergy with hand-to-hand combat. So, with that in mind, Kaminari's hit was hard enough and was flooded with enough lightning that Bakugo was stunned for 5 full seconds, allowing Izuku to rush past and start climbing the stairs without issue. "What?" groaned Bakugo before blasting back to his feet. "So the lightning extra has some power? Well, bring it on." Kaminari raised a fist with a grin. "Let's go!" Bakugo rushed forward with a wide grin. As soon as he got within striking distance, Bakugo put both palms forward and blasted a large explosion that pushed him back and knocked Kaminari off his feet. "What a pain!" grunted Kaminari as he got back up and rushed towards Bakugo, but not completely closing the distance. Bakugo didn't beat around the bush. He rushed directly at Kaminari and moved to blast over Kaminari to attack from his flank, but Kaminari was faster and lashed out with a high kick that was saturated with lightning. Bakugo convulsed the instant the kick connected before being launched at the wall. However, before he could impact, he recovered and blasted himself back into the fight. Kaminari got into a stance and saturated his body with crackling yellow lightning. Bakugo landed and closed distance on foot rather than in the air. Honed from over 200 bouts, Kaminari instantly connected the dots and in classic form, released the lightning in an indiscriminate shock as soon as Bakugo was in range. Bakugo howled in anger and pain as the lightning flowed into him. Izuku sighed as he made it to the 4th level, the one he was sure Todoroki was on. Matter manipulation was a very versatile quirk. His current range was a bit over 15 meters, and due to the fact that he could manipulate anything in his range with varying levels of effectiveness meant that he could sense everything in his area of effectiveness. Which meant that he could feel Todoroki slouching right in front of the bomb seemingly without a care in the world. The building became colder and colder the closer he got to the door. Focusing on his body and 10 centimeters off of it, Izuku manipulated everything in the bubble to be warm and instantly vaporize any water or ice that entered it. It was a sort of barrier that would render any form of water to nothing, instantly separating the hydrogen and oxygen. It took lots of focus and tremendous practice, but Izuku felt it was paying off right now. Todoroki was up against his worst matchup. Water and all of its states of matter were Izuku's to play with. Unless the team used his fire, he was effectively quirkless. Opening the door, the ice on it and around the doorway instantly vaporized as he walked through. "A bit chilly in here," mused Izuku with a smile. "I'll be taking that bomb, villain!" he shouted as heroically as he could. really just emulating All Might as best he could. Todoroki seemed nonplussed. Why is the ice disappearing as you walk forward? He asked in an empty monotone. Izuku smiled, not stopping as he walked towards the bomb. Any ice that gets within 10 centimeters of my body is vaporized. I try out the fire side, all states of water are useless against me. Todoroki glared at him before stomping his foot and sending a massive pillar of ice at Izuku, who just continued to walk forward. As soon as the ice entered his range, it vaporized, and the massive pillar was no longer as large or imposing. He was now 2 meters from the bomb and right next to Todoroki. Ice won't work, Todoroki, Izuku said with a smile before continuing toward the bomb. It's my win. The second Izuku said that, he laid his hand on the bomb and a loud horn sounded. Raiding team wins! Screamed All Might through the intercom. Todoroki looked shell-shocked as All Might's voice reverberated throughout the building, his fist clenching and unclenching as he glared at the ground with a furious look in his eyes. Izuku moved to speak to him, but he backed off when he thought about it. Todoroki didn't look like someone words would reach at the moment. Izuku made his way back to Kaminari, who was being verbally assaulted by Bakugo. You didn't win! You hear me? Shouted Bakugo. Ice Princess lost us the battle, not me. What a waste, having to rely on an extra like him. He grunted with a disgusted look on his face. I think it was more that Midoriya completely countered the ice half of his quirk, commented Kaminari with a thoughtful look on his face. If he used his fire, it would have been a bit more troublesome, I think. Yep, interjected Izuku as he got closer. For some reason he didn't use his fire, but we won, so I'm happy. Bakugo glared at him. Deku, this was supposed to be our battle, he said with fire in his eyes. Izuku shrugged. Kaminari wasn't in a position to fight off the amount of ice Todoroki could summon, so he wanted to fight you. Bakugo grunted before shooting Kaminari a look. We're going to fight again, and it won't be stopped because of someone else, he said before stalking away. Izuku watched him walk away before turning to Kaminari. Congratulations, he likes you, he said with a laugh. That's what that means? Kaminari asked in shock. I thought that meant he wanted to kick my ass. He does, said Izuku, but he wouldn't bother wanting to fight you if he thought you were weak. Kaminari sighed while rubbing his forehead. Great, he was starting to get used to my lightning toward the end, which means he's going to be harder to fight the longer we fight, which is just unfair, he complained. Izuku patted him on the back and they made their way back to the class observation room. Todoroki was already there, standing off to the side, making a point of ignoring and avoiding everyone in the room. Bakugo was less secluded but wasn't making a point of interacting with the class. Kaminari was rushed by Ojiro, the boy with a large tail for a quirk. Those were some good moves, especially the high kick, he said with an impressed look. Well, I've been training for about a year before getting into UA, shrugged Kaminari. All right, everyone, began All Might. What are the thoughts on this battle? Who can we say is the MVP? Ida raised his hand. Sir, I believe that everyone performed as best they could bar Todoroki. Other than his first ice ambush, he failed to adapt to Midoriya's overcoming of his ice. I believe he should have tried to fight hand to hand or move the bomb away. Momo continued. Since the scenario was a team of heroes protecting a device or a team of heroes retrieving a device, I believe Bakugo leaving to fight could be seen as a shortcoming, as he is leaving something less protected. However, taking the fight away from a VIP is also important, and foreseeing Midoriya being completely immune to someone would be next to impossible to predict without knowing him and his quirk very well. I am having trouble deciding between Kaminari and Midoriya for MVP, as both did their jobs, either stalling or retrieving, well, and in the end, it was the right play overall. Bakugo grunted but didn't say anything as he agreed with her assessment. The silent Aizawa at the center of the computers controlling the cameras for the task spoke up. Midoriya represented something that every hero will eventually come up against, some more than others. Someone whose quirk completely counters your own, making it useless or actively hurting you due to your own quirk. My quirk erasure represents that as well. Villains don't know what to do when I turn off their quirk. Similarly, Todoroki was caught off guard when Midoriya completely neutralized his ice. The class muttered at their teacher's wisdom before he continued. That being said, whoever came up with the plan is the MVP. So, it's Kaminari, said Izuku. He decided to fight Bakugo and had me go for Todoroki. Kaminari grinned. Hell yeah! He cheered, getting laughs and similar cheers from the class. Congratulations, young Kaminari, said All Might. If I could recommend something for those situations is to make sure that you aren't overly relying on any one aspect of your abilities. Ranged fighters shouldn't neglect close quarters and vice versa. Now let's continue, shouted All Might. The next fight was between Hagakure and Aoyama versus Kirishima and Shoji. Izuku could tell where they were going with this matchup. Ranged Aoyama versus close-range Kirishima, and stealthy Hagakure versus the vigilant Shoji. Making mental notes of their abilities, Izuku could only really see Hagakure as being the tough opponent, as she was completely invisible, and finding her could prove difficult. Izuku was sure that his enhancements were enough to deal with Shoji and Aoyama, and he was confident he could weaken Kirishima's hardening with his quirk. Overall, Izuku felt he could handle the four of them without issue. The third battle was between Mineta and Zero versus Uraraka and Momo. Both teams were capable of binding opponents in some way, so it was a battle of detainment. Surprisingly, Izuku learned that the balls on Mineta's head were nearly indestructible, and he was sure that the only way to remove them were to break them down on a molecular level, which meant that being hit with multiple would be trouble even for him. Other than that, close distance with Zero, keep distance with Uraraka, and try to predict and outmaneuver Momo. The next battle was between Ida and Azuri versus Koda and Jiro. Despite coming off as mean, at this point none of them looked to be someone Izuku would struggle with. Ida was fast, but Izuku's enhancements made him sturdy and stronger, while Azuri had high mobility and versatility. She didn't excel at any of it. Koda was useless without animals from what he could tell, and Jiro would be a pain, but he could use his quirk to hold her ears so she couldn't move them and overtake her. The final battle was Sato and Ojiro versus Tokoemi and Ishido. Unlike before, Izuku acknowledged all of them as worthy opponents. Ojiro was clearly the best in the class at hand-to-hand, and if his nearly 300 loses at Fight Dojo taught him anything, it was that experience beat raw power. Ishido would require lots of focus to reduce pH levels so her acid wouldn't hurt him, and her mobility and agility would make her tough close-up. Tokoemi was a 2-for-1 as his quirk was sentient, which meant Izuku wouldn't be able to judge how tough the fight would be. Creating some sort of light source to reduce the shadow's power would be a good start. Sato was an enhancer, but his top level of strength and ferocity could catch him off guard if he got too cocky. Messing with his sugar levels to remove his strength would be the best start, however that amount of focus could be difficult mid-fight. Excellent work! Cheered All Might once everyone was back together. I believe this was a resounding success. Use the experience of live combat and the observations of your classmates to help train and strategize for future battles. With that, I am off, leaving like a hero. Again, the class bore witness to the absurdity of All Might's speed as he quite literally vanished faster than any of them could register. How do you overcome that? Asked Ojiro in wonder. Izuku laughed. Finding a way to hinder his movement, like fighting around civilians or in a small area. However, that would just make him end the fight faster. Having multiple enemies that could slow or hinder him while someone was pressuring him up close would be a good start. He mused. Kaminari shook his head. Who the hell could pressure All Might up close? Isn't his power screw you I'm stronger the quirk? He asked incredulously. Izuku shrugged. Didn't say it was possible, just that it was a way. He's the number one for a reason. No one in the near 30 years he's been active has come close to the guy in ability. Mr. Aizawa! Called Uraraka, getting the man's attention. Could you cancel All Might's quirk? He gave her a look before shrugging. Most likely, seeing as how his quirk is some sort of enhancer, but based on his size I would assume he'd still ragdoll me. Yeah. The guy must eat a whole cow for protein, laughed Kirishima. Momo tilted her head. Actually, I think Midoriya could defeat All Might, she said, shocking the class. Izuku, who had spent the weeks leading up to Yuri getting his ass kicked by All Might, was very interested to hear her theory. His quirk allows him to manipulate matter, she continued. He could likely paralyze him by severing his spinal column, or flat-out lobotomizing him, and there would be no muscling through that. It was the villain way. Izuku sighed. Quite frankly, she's right. Getting even more shocked cries from the class. My quirk is immensely dangerous and even more versatile, but I would never do something I couldn't undo. So, while I could kill him quite easily, I would never do something like that. I wouldn't be a hero if I did after all. With those words said, the class walked back to the locker rooms to change. All think about how lethal their quirks really were, and where the line should be drawn in their uses. Aizawa gave the class a look of approval as he noticed their lines of thought. Chapter 7. The next day of class, Class 1A was told they were going to be doing something important to the running of their class that will affect them for the rest of the year. I have no idea what's coming, said Ishido with a voice quiver. But I'm terrified. Mr. Aizawa likes to build suspense, Karo, said Tsuyu with a frown. The rest of the class nodded or made sounds of agreement while discussing what the day could entail. Meanwhile, Izuku, who was writing in his notebook, decided to ignore the conversation as it was going to end up being something lame. He was working on several new ideas, one of which was much to his own shock he managed to finish. The rest were works in progress, and he was also hit with a large hammer of realization last night. Sitting at his computer watching a cheesy action movie, whose villain could shape-shift something which made him a terrifying opponent, Izuku realized that he had been putting quite a bit of focus on manipulating the building blocks of the universe to create rather than influencing change. He was able to move and manipulate anything under 5 kilograms. For over a year he had been working on using that to create, and while it was a very powerful tool at his disposal, it shouldn't be his primary focus. Just some experimenting with this last night, he managed to shift the cells in his fingers to harden similarly to Kirishima's quirk, although he did struggle to undo it for a while. It showed that he could change small things relatively quickly and with some ease. He rediscovered that the strength of his quirk lies in influencing change, or rather manipulating. Creation has always been a byproduct of that, and was something that took so much time and effort to be functional. He would split his quirk into 2 halves. First was the change or manipulation, which he would dub alchemy. The second would be creation, which he would dub construction. So, in class today, Izuku was working on what else he could alchemically make rather than completely create at the moment. He wanted to alter Earth to something like mud to create a mudslide. He would have to work around the weight limit, but going 5 kilograms at a time should be manageable. Enhancing his water control to create even colder ice or boiling water, condensing reactions or redirecting them. Example would be Bakugo's explosion. Maybe he could catch the explosion and redirect it or reform it. Change fire to something completely different. It is after all a gas that he could change to suit his needs. Midoriya! Izuku looked up and noticed that most of the class was looking at him, with Momo, who was blushing red, being the one who shouted at him. With everyone staring at him, he made sure to be eloquent. Nailed it. Ida, ever diligent, responded. We are supposed to decide on class president and are throwing out ideas on how to decide. Izuku looked over to the corner of the room to see Aizawa passed out in his sleeping bag. It would seem that he missed the start of class in his thoughts. Why not vote or something? Izuku asked, not sure why it was a dilemma. Well, we don't know each other that well, said Kaminari, getting a raised brow from Izuku. Yeah, you and I know each other well enough, but not the whole class. It wouldn't be that good of a vote if everyone votes for themselves. Precisely, shouted Ida. With such a situation, if someone receives multiple votes, then they are the prime candidate. The rest of the class agreeing with cheerful cries. Izuku, however. I abstain, he said with a smile, much to the rest of the class's shock. What? Why? Ishido asked in shock. Momo turned with a confused expression. I thought you would be a good president, she said with a small frown. I mean, yeah. I was gonna vote for you, said Uraraka with a blush. I don't have the time, said Izuku. I have too much to focus on already. I don't think I can add to it with extra responsibilities in school. The hell you got going on, Deku? Bakugo asked with a snort. Izuku sighed. He was going to have to explain, wasn't he? My quirk takes a lot of study and training to be usable. I spend most of my free time studying and practicing with my quirk, he said with a sigh. Kirishima frowned. Yes, so does everyone else. We all train our quirks in our spare time. Izuku shook his head. No, what I mean is that for me to do this dash. Izuku raised his finger, and a small shining cube of pure iron was brought into existence to the awe of the class. That took me months of study and training to do that much. To create a single milligram of iron took over 15 minutes of extreme focus almost a year ago. I only recently got it to a usable level. The class muttered to themselves, some giving Izuku looks of respect for his diligence, while Momo was giving him a look of admiration and a touch of pity. He knew she was giving him the poor thing has a difficult quirk look, something she took joy in doing for the first time in her life. Even though it annoyed him something fierce. If that is your decision, said Ida, then we will pick from the rest of the class. After some paper passing and writing, Izuku collected all the paper with his quirk and tallied the votes. To his surprise, though in hindsight it wasn't much of a surprise, Ida won with 3 votes, while Momo got 2. Izuku smirked. He voted for Ida since the boy was practically the class president already with his diligent need to uphold the rules of the school. Ida wins with 3 votes, with Momo coming in second with 2. There are president and vice president, announced Izuku. Ida stood and bowed deeply. I pledge to uphold the values and duties of this class, and this school, to the utmost of my ability. If I were to fail, then dash. We get it, interrupted Aizawa, who had woken during the commotion. Ida, go back to your seat. Yaorozu and yourself need to meet with me after class this afternoon so I can go over what you need to do. Aizawa looked at Izuku. Midoriya, don't think that the life of a hero will give you ample off time whenever you want. But that's why you're a student. Continue to use your time wisely. I say that to all of you. Your time as a student should be the time you explore all avenues of your quirk, he said before walking out of the room. The next second the bell rang, signaling lunch. The class rushed off to get food. Izuku was one of the first ones to get to the lunchroom so that he could say hi to Lunch Rush before he got too busy. Izuku was always going to be excited to meet a pro, even one that isn't super popular. The hero gave him his usual lunch, nearly twice the serving of everyone else due to his body's need for extra calories. Taking his seat, he got to work on his food while the rest of his class got into line. It was a few minutes later that Izuku was wiping his face after finishing his food that his classmates started to sit down by him. Momo sat first with Uraraka sitting next to her across from him, and Ida sat next to him. He spotted Kaminari over by Jiro and Ishido talking animatedly with the girls, both of whom were showing varying levels of interest. Izuku mentally sent encouragement to his friend who had expressed interest in the cool punk rock chick. I'm surprised that you didn't think you could be president, said Momo as she tucked into her meal. Izuku shrugged. I don't think I couldn't, but I do want some free time when I'm not training or studying. I suppose, but it would have been nice to work together, she said before quickly adding. Not that I don't like the thought of working with Ida, you seem fit for the role. The boy in question gave her a bow in thanks. Izuku laughed, and Uraraka nodded. Yep. Since you backed out, I voted for Ida. He has that whole president aesthetic I couldn't pass up. You voted for him for his aesthetic, said Izuku with a chuckle. I voted for Ida due to his diligent attitude regarding the school's rules and regulations. Ida, who was uncharacteristically silent during the discussion, looked as if he'd won the greatest award in the world. As finally, his personality regarding order was being recognized, and his brother said it would never get him any props. Thank you both, said Ida with barely contained glee. Although I'm not sure how to respond to my looks getting me a vote, he said with a hand rubbing his chin in thought. Uraraka waved it off. Don't think too hard on it, she said, feeling a bit embarrassed. Momo decided to move to another subject. So Midoriya, what are you working on with your quirk these days? Must be interesting. Izuku smiled. I'm going to start working on manipulating rather than creation for a bit. While I won't stop working on creating elements until I master them all, I want to focus on a larger variety of things with my quirk, he said while raising his hand and hardening it. Something I got to work last night. That's like Kirishima's quirk, Uraraka said, stunned. Can you do mine too? Izuku shook his head. Your quirk is quite confusing to me. You can remove the effects of gravity on what you touch. I can't do that to my knowledge, but I bet with time you may be able to increase the effect of gravity. It seems strange that it only goes one way. Or she could hold someone in place with 0 gravity, mused Momo. If she were to be able to increase gravity, then there would be dangerous implications. Too much gravity and it starts to affect space and time. Izuku shrugged. You're telling that to someone who manipulates matter on an atomic level, he said with a laugh. Momo blushed. Well, that's true. Also, can't you create anything non-organic with your fat cells? You could just make a nuke or highly radiated metal and kill us all, Izuku said with a grin. We can't really talk when it comes to far-reaching effects. Momo looked down with red cheeks. Yeah, I suppose. I just thought I made stuff float, said Uraraka with a nervous laugh. Making something float and removing gravity are 2 completely different things, corrected Izuku. You can manipulate gravity. Something to figure out is by how much. Everyone jumped up when the loud alarm started blaring, causing all of the students to panic and rush to the main exit of the lunchroom. That is the alarm if there are intruders on the campus, Ida shouted in realization. Everyone, we must leave at once, he shouted to the area where the rest of their class was. Izuku frowned and looked around the room, There was another exit in the back, but no one was going that way. He decided he should try and find a teacher to see what was going on. Someone breaking into UA during the day seemed highly unlikely. Exiting the lunchroom, he ran down the hallway and spotted out the side window a large crowd of reporters entering through the gates, making Izuku roll his eyes. Of course, it was something like that. Now that he was less concerned for everyone seeing as how there wasn't an actual threat, he was able to walk through the hall without worry. Once he got to the end of the hall, he felt someone enter his range. He didn't recognize them, but there were thousands of students at UA, so that wasn't cause for concern. But the closer he got, the less confident, as he sensed more of the person he was getting closer to. The man turned the corner and spotted Izuku. He was tall, a full head over Izuku. He wore a black hoodie and black pants, but some of his teal hair was peeking out from the hood. "So, an NPC decided to snoop around," he growled. "NPC?" asked Izuku. "Wait, I'm the one snooping? Aren't you breaking in here?" "I don't like this dialogue," he said before a purple warp gate opened under him, allowing him to fall to safety. Izuku tried to sense the properties of the warp gate, but all he could feel were the atoms being not quite split, but as if they were only half there. But before he could get an accurate feel of them, they were gone, and he was alone in the hallway. "I don't need to tell you how bad it could have gone if you were attacked, right?" Aizawa asked tiredly. "But thank you for telling us someone actually broke in. We were under the impression that it was just the press, although we had suspicions about it due to the nature." Izuku nodded. "He was a weirdo, but that would just make him dangerous," he said with a grimace. "Also, that warp quirk was impressive. They're so rare that there isn't much info about them. If you need any help, get out of here, problem child," said Aizawa, waving him off. "Leave it to us." Izuku nodded and rushed off after the class, who were already dismissed. He had promised Momo that they could discuss their quirks after class over coffee. He found her waiting for him in the courtyard, scrolling through her phone. He was pretty nervous about their planned outing. All he knew when she asked him was that she had some ideas about his quirk and would love to hear any ideas he had about hers. He proposed to do it over coffee instead of her idea of him going to her house. He wasn't sure he was ready for that. She may only intend for it to be a friendly meeting at her house, but he was sure his mind would overload with the implications. Regardless, she spotted him and was waved him over. Time to pretend he had the confidence to talk to her in the first place. The whole fake it till you make it. "Hey Yayorozu," he said with a wave. "Ready to go?" Momo nodded rapidly. "Yes. I've been brimming with ideas for the past few nights," she said with a beaming smile. "Think about me that much, huh?" he asked. Momo blushed red. "Well, I'm fascinated by your quirk," she said quickly. Izuku nodded. "Why'd I say that?" he screamed mentally. They continued walking with idle chat about their classes, Momo being interested in Midnight's art history lessons and the woman herself, while Izuku found the classes on heroics and hero regulations fascinating, as it was a subject he was interested in but didn't know much about yet. They arrived at the street where their desired coffee shop location was and noticed that there were a lot of people rushing away, passing them, bumping into them in their haste and not even bothering to apologize. He and Momo shared a look and continued on to see what was going on. Further up the block were 3 men and 2 heroes. The first man, and who appeared to be the leader, was a tall, bald man who wore a sleeveless vest and dark red pants. The vest had flame patterns on it, and his eyes glowed amber. Most notable were his hands that had large flames coming off them, and he looked confident as he gazed at the 2 heroes in front of them. The second man was in a set of baggy cargo pants and no shirt. He had spiky blue hair and his face was very chiseled, almost as if it were made of stone. On his fists were gleaming blue crystals that extended up his arm, and some were on his chest. A very powerful defensive quirk from what Izuku could tell. The last man was the most normal-looking one. He was the tallest of the 3, but his features were quite plain. He had short black hair and some stubble on his face. He wore a short-sleeved shirt and regular jeans with no descriptive features. However, he possessed some sort of strength quirk, as he just punched one of the 2 heroes across the street into a building, knocking him out. "Diamond, take out the other trash! He's here!" shouted the leader as his fire went out, and he turned towards Izuku and Momo. The man with the crystals, now named Diamond, roared in excitement, and charged the other hero, who tried to stop him by causing the ground to vibrate. However, Diamond charged through it, and covered himself in his crystals before impact, causing the hero to fly off and land right by his partner. "Which one is it, Pyro?" asked the strength enhancer with a bored tone. The leader, Pyro, smirked and pointed directly at Izuku. That one. The strength enhancer cracked his neck and charged forward with Diamond following behind with far less speed but a dangerous amount of momentum. Momo reacted first and created a large net launcher and fired it at both of them. Diamond was actually tripped up by it while the enhancer caught it and ripped it apart without batting an eye and continued forward at them. Izuku created his shield, the same one he used during the entrance exam, and met the enhancer. The man's fist met his shield with a loud gong and a shockwave that disturbed the air around them. Izuku grunted but held under the man's strength. His enhanced bones and muscles straining but not at their limit yet. Pyro sighed and burned the net off of Diamond, who was clumsily trying to undo it. You moron, the more you struggle the harder it is to undo. He spoke with an eye roll. Then Pyro turned to the crowd with a massive grin. You all are bothering me, he said before he fired twin streams of flames at the building where the heroes were unconscious. The civilians screamed and Izuku growled. Momo! Go help them! I'll lead these three away, for some reason they're after me, he said, and before she could voice her thoughts on the plan he rushed off to where he knew a small park was that they could fight, hopefully without someone getting in the way. Diamond and the strength enhancer followed on foot while Pyro flew by shooting flames from his palms. It took Izuku less than a minute to arrive at the park, and thankfully all the commotion caused everyone to leave the area and he was able to face the three villains without worry of a civilian. Smart move, boy, Pyro commended with a nod. But honestly, this helps us too, no one to help you after all. Bruiser, you're up, he commanded the strength enhancer. Bruiser sighed. We're going to have a conversation about these names. Nonetheless, he rushed forward directly at Izuku. Izuku readied his shield and met the man in the middle of the clearing, but instead of clashing he ducked under the punch and bashed Bruiser in the chest with his shield. The man grunted in pain but was able to kick Izuku away and recover. Diamond! Shouted Pyro. Bruiser backed off and Diamond took his place and rushed with his crystal-covered body. Izuku used alchemy to change the shield into a gauntlet and met Diamond with a punch to the face that only barely chipped the crystal but managed to knock him off balance and fall to the ground. Before Izuku could think, he was forced to roll away from a jet of flames and change his gauntlet back to a shield and defend himself from the flames. In his stationary state, Izuku was able to make a small barrier around his shield that would suck the oxygen from the flames, snuffing them out, further enhancing his defense. Unfortunately, he had to remain stationary for now as he was getting a handle on the technique. Pyro let up his barrage of flames and Izuku released his hold on the vacuum barrier. You're impressive, Pyro said with a patronizing smirk. I can see why the boss is so interested in you. So far you've had an answer for everything we've thrown at you. Izuku frowned. Who are you people? He asked, hoping to give himself time to think of a plan. Pyro noticed this and smirked wider. Irrelevant! He shouted. Bruiser rushed forward with even more ferocity than before and Izuku was forced on the defensive, blocking the attacks that were slowly getting stronger and faster until he was disarmed of his shield. Instead of summoning back his shield, he decided to focus on hand-to-hand and slowly started to get used to Bruiser's timing. A quick jab was dodged and countered with a cross. The man didn't let up and tried to retaliate, but Izuku countered again with a right, staggering Bruiser. However, before Izuku could continue, he was barreled into by Diamond and was blasted through the swing set and sprawled onto the ground. He groaned, then he sensed fire coming at him and kicked the ground hard to dodge and ducked under a haymaker from Bruiser. Izuku jumped back to avoid another slam from Diamond and rolled under a jet of flame. He mentally groaned at the three of them, not allowing him time to focus on anything or come up with a plan. Izuku knew that Pyro was the brain here and tried to focus on him. He created the vacuum in front of him, which managed to stop the fire assault, and tried to close distance as fast as he could. Using his awareness of his surroundings, he was able to avoid the tackle from Diamond but was kicked by Bruiser. The kick caused Izuku to lose focus and the vacuum destabilized, which allowed Pyro to attack with more fire. Izuku raised a hand and snuffed the flames as he gathered his thoughts. With a tremendous amount of focus, he tried something that he only thought of for the first time earlier today. Fire is gas and light, which may not have mass, but the atomic properties that make fire do have mass, and the heat and reactions would be the same even if the visual properties of fire were there or not. Layman's terms, this means that everything about fire aside from how it looks has mass, and if it does, then it's his to play with. Reaching out, Izuku grabbed every oxygen and carbon atom that were giving off large amounts of heat, as they were the foundations for the fire attacks. He pulled and created an orb of these atoms 5 meters from himself and attracted all further atoms from Pyro's attacks into this orb. The light and flames that usually accompanied fire puttered out in front of him but were quickly gathered around the slowly growing orb, which was larger than a watermelon now, and the heat was far more intense than the attacks Pyro was throwing out before. The area was overcome with a haze from the intense heat. Bruiser and Diamond moved behind Pyro, who they expected to protect them from the fireball. This is really difficult, but it's good to know I can do it. I'll call it Flame Commandment, as it is a far deeper form of pyrokinesis than what a flame quirk would be. But at the moment, holding it together is the most I can do. Honestly, I'm shocked I can do this much. Izuku thought while trying to hide the strain of his impromptu technique. Izuku, with mental focus that made him feel like someone was slowly stabbing his head with a blade, created a vacuum around the fire orb and slowly snuffed it out. Taking their shock at his ability to focus on his next move, he cupped his hands and waited while building up the amount of air and pressure between his palms. "How did you do that?" asked Pyro without his superior tone. Izuku smiled. "I was tired of the fire," he said simply before rushing forward while keeping his hands cupped. Bruiser pushed past Pyro and tried to meet Izuku in the middle of the park, but Izuku slid under his attack and continued forward. Diamond tried to tackle him, but Izuku jumped over him. He got within 3 meters of Pyro, who shook off the shock of Izuku's flame commandment and tried to attack with 2 streams of fire. Izuku, similar to a very old and famous anime, pushed both palms forward and a shockwave of compressed air met the flames, causing an explosion that blasted Pyro out of the park and into the side of a building, knocking him unconscious. Turning to face the 2 other villains, he took a deep breath and readied for their attacks. Diamond rushed forward. This time his crystals were more streamlined, and his movements were faster. Bruiser's muscles started to bulge and become veiny, and every step created an indentation in the ground. Izuku spun around Diamond and met Bruiser's punch with a kick and groaned when he felt his bones rattle but hold firm. With speed greater than before, Bruiser grabbed his leg and slammed him into the ground. Izuku was forced to roll from a stomp but was kicked by Diamond, knocking him a few meters away. So far, he was being pushed to his limits. Bruiser was getting stronger, and he was at his limit of strength, and he was incapable of stopping Diamond's tackles and didn't have something that could break the crystals. Getting an idea, he raised both hands and created 5 kilograms worth of water above their heads several times over in the span of 10 seconds, completely soaking the both of them. "Looks like I'll have to dry off after this," laughed Bruiser. "Are you too tired to do damage anymore?" Diamond laughed with a gravelly voice. "Boy must be out of gas," he said in a deep voice. While they were mocking him, Izuku had his hands in a prayer motion, his eyes closed, and he focused even harder than with the fire on something he only recently accomplished. He in his right hand created positively charged electrons, and in his left he did the same, while in the middle he created negatively charged ones, while passing everything by each other to create more. Such was the rudimentary way to create lightning. If his math was right, which it usually is, this would be a very small amount of lightning, but enough to do some damage. Diamond and Bruiser finished laughing at him and charged forward. Izuku opened his eyes and separated his hands. If the men looked closely, they would have seen both hands have a sort of shimmering haze coming off of them, but they didn't and got within striking distance. Izuku pushed both palms forward with a scream of "Palm strike!" From both hands were small but extremely bright and hot arcs of blue lightning that barely extended an inch off of his hands. It hit their waterlogged bodies, causing them to scream and be zapped across the area, rendering them unconscious not even a second after being shocked. Izuku slumped over and tried to catch his breath, the exhaustion from the fight catching up to him now that his adrenaline was wearing off. For coming up with it in the moment, Palm Strike is a fun name. Palm Strike being the term for the physical attack and also referencing a lightning strike due to the lightning. Izuku thought while mentally patting himself on the back. Diamond shakily got to his feet, no crystals on his body any longer, while his entire body was smoking and his breath was labored. Izuku looked to see that Bruiser was still out and relaxed slightly. "How?" he growled. Izuku chuckled and alchemically changed his school jacket to a hoodie and put on the hood. He raised his hands in front of him, and with an exaggerated growl he said, "Anything is possible with enough hatred, my foolish apprentice. The dark side of the Force is a path to many dash." Before he could finish, his head was wrapped tightly in something vaguely familiar. Using his quirk, he ripped it off of his face and saw that Diamond was being apprehended by Midnight and Vlad King. Turning his head, he saw an exasperated Aizawa looking at him while retracting his capture scarf. "Were you quoting the villain from Star Wars?" he asked tiredly. Izuku laughed nervously. "I wasn't going to tell him what I actually did." Aizawa sighed. Good, some heroes love to give away their secrets hoping for more publicity. He pointed to the surrounding buildings where many people were recording with their phones. I'm sure people have enough questions as it is. Izuku suddenly got even more nervous at the attention he was receiving, and could hear some of the people cheering for him making smile. He raised his fist in victory, causing everyone watching to cheer, making him grin, and raise the other one. Izuku began to speak to himself. And so he stands with his immeasurable power, victorious, as his is the greatest dash. Once again, his face was covered by the capture scarf, but this time he wasn't able to pull himself free. I'm just making sure your head doesn't get too big, he barely heard Aizawa say. He heard sirens, and after a moment he was released and felt a hand on his shoulder. You did well, Aizawa said seriously. Recognizing their objective and getting the villains away from a populated area was a pro move. Before Izuku could respond, he was nearly tackled off of his feet by Momo, who was covered in dust and grime from helping with the fires. You're hurt, she shouted in worry. I am? He asked with a frown. He felt sore all over and his head was killing him, not to mention he was so tired he was about to pass out, but he didn't think he was injured. She created a towel and wiped his face that showed a startling amount of blood. Oh, he said in shock. I didn't even notice. Let's get you both to the infirmary. Recovery Girl is the closest doctor. You two didn't even get 3 kilometers from UA before being attacked, said Aizawa, leading them away and letting the rest of the heroes handle the villains and police. Yayorozu, you did well. Contacting the school and assisting in the rescue of the injured heroes and evacuation of civilians is what being a pro is all about. Momo's smile looked like it could brighten a dark room as she thanked their teacher for his words. Izuku silently agreed with Aizawa and sent her a smile that she reciprocated. I'll give you the okay for now, said Recovery Girl. You have some serious bruises, and while no broken bones, I wouldn't doubt that you were close to it with some of your ribs. I've seen victims of hit and runs have less damage. Izuku groaned and held ice to his side. Well, I was tackled by a 100 kilograms walking diamond. Recovery Girl hummed. Well, your most worrying injuries are the internal bruising and bleeding. Something I'm sure you could fix yourself when you're more rested. Just don't do anything strenuous till you do that, and come see me tomorrow before class. Izuku silently saluted her and laid back down on the bed. Some police are here to speak with you, namely the captain of the closest precinct, she said before opening the door, letting the 2 men in. The first was a large, intimidating man whose most prominent feature were glowing red eyes. The other was a kinder-looking man with brown hair and a reassuring expression on his face. Hello, said the kinder-looking man. My name is Detective Tsukachi and this is Captain Atsutake. Izuku waved but didn't speak. Do you have any idea how many laws you broke, boy? Asked Atsutake with a growl. Those men were injured by your quirk, which is grounds for what are you doing? Izuku, who midway through the man's yelling got up and started making his way to the door. He turned to speak to him. I'm going to go jump off the roof, he said to their shock. If I didn't fight back, I'd be dead, so I'm undoing the laws I broke like you want. Boy. Dash. The captain started to yell but was interrupted by Tsukachi. Now let's calm down, he said placatingly. Mr. Midoriya, I'm sorry you went through this attack, but we have to bring up the law, otherwise we wouldn't be doing our jobs. Izuku didn't look impressed. Yeah, the law, no quirk use on someone no matter what, he said with a roll of his eyes. I'm not apologizing, nor am I sorry they were hurt. They tried to kill me and I dash. Before he could finish, the doors to the infirmary opened and first through was Aizawa, followed, or more precisely riding atop of Aizawa was Principal Nizu, followed by Momo, then a woman who looked like an older Momo, and an older man with a briefcase. I thought I said to wait for the staff or his mother, Aizawa said tiredly. The captain glared. We're the police and he is more than old enough to be spoken to alone. Tsukachi sighed. I apologize, he said quietly. Anyway, continued Izuku. As I was saying, it was life or death and I very much didn't want to die. So I met their attacks with my own. You know, sometimes fighting fire with fire is the best option. So I decided to meet their villainous fire with a flaming fist of justice. Laid him, someone said in the back. I trust that Mr. Midoriya isn't in trouble for protecting so many and not only fighting but subduing those villains, the older Momo said with a raised brow that made the officers feel a centimeter tall. If you are, however, my lawyers will be there to fight all charges. She gestured to the older man, who nodded. That won't be necessary, Tsukachi said quickly. We were actually here to tell him he wasn't going to be charged as it was in self-defense, as dozens of video recordings can no doubt corroborate. The captain growled but didn't say anything. Excellent! Nisa clapped and gestured for the police to follow, and the heroes and police quickly left the room after that. Older Momo turned to Izuku. It's wonderful to meet you, Midoriya. My daughter speaks quite highly of you, she said while ignoring the squawk from Momo. I'm Nanao Yaoyorozu. If there's anything we can do for you, please say so. Before he could respond, the door was slammed open and his mother practically teleported to him to crush him in a hug that had him wince in pain. Oh, Izuku, are you okay? You're not hurt, are you? If they hurt you, I'll kill those bastards, she worried/screamed. Mom! He shouted to snap her out of it. Honestly, you're hurting me more than they did, he said, making her release him quickly. He saw Momo giggling off to the side with her mother smiling at the exchange. Oh, said Inko when she noticed them. Sorry about that, I'm his mother, Inko Midoriya. Nanao and my daughter Momo Yaoyorozu, said Nanao before smiling. I like your energy. I felt the same when I heard what happened to my daughter. Inko blushed and rubbed the back of her head. Yeah, I got a bit carried away, she said with a small laugh. Well, we need to be getting home. Great work today, Midoriya, said Nanao before leaving. Momo smiled at him. See you tomorrow. Also, we still have to have our discussion, although the coffee shop was burned down, she said with a frown. You can just come over to my house, it'll be great. Momo left to catch up to her mother, and he turned to his own, who looked like the cat who ate the canary. Oh my, who was that? She was quite the beauty. Are you two together? Going to her place to have a discussion? Is that what it's called now? Izuku's face turned red and the previously forgotten recovery girl at her desk laughed, making him even redder. I'm just going to drag myself home now, he said, not making eye contact with anyone. Izuku made sure to ignore his mother's teasing the whole way home, and the last thing he remembered was the impact of his face onto his pillow. Chapter 8. The battle outside of UA brought several questions from the police that Izuku had to answer. Thankfully, the nice detective came to his house to ask them, leaving the angry chief behind, everyone knowing that Izuku wasn't going to be cowed by the man's presence or appreciative of his attitude. First question was the easiest. Did he know them? Izuku didn't, and proceeded to explain that they were under orders by a mysterious boss. Other than that, it was questions about his daily life and if he was familiar with anyone who could have it out for him. Izuku didn't have any, and the detective spent the rest of the time reassuring him and his mother that they would work hard to prevent another incident from happening. Izuku, finally home and alone without someone bothering him, was able to take stock of the injuries that were left over. Nothing too strenuous, and he was able to heal up in a matter of minutes. Unlike with others, Izuku was able to heal himself with incredible ease. For now, he was going to take a nap and try to relax after a stressful and long day. At 8 at night, the day of the attack on UA students, Midoriya, Izuku, and Yaoyorozu Momo, the national news for Japan, made it their top story. Hundreds of thousands tuned in to the top story as articles and social media posts were already going crazy after the very public attack. Good afternoon, everyone. This is your nightly news anchor, Tamayo Kyoko, she said before gesturing to the older man next to her who looked quite disheveled. We are joined by our senior quirk analyst Masao Khan. Earlier today, 3 villains attacked the area around UA High and then proceeded to target first-year hero student Midoriya Izuku when he and another first-year Yaoyorozu Momo walked onto the scene. She began. So far, UA hasn't made any official statements, and the police have stated that the villains were being processed and Mr. Midoriya isn't going to be charged with illegal quirk usage. Which should come as no surprise that it was clearly self-defense. She gestured to the screen where the 3 villains, Pyro, Diamond, and Bruiser, were fighting with the 2 pro-heroes. Mr. Masao, what can you tell us about the villains? Masao took a deep breath. They have impressive quirks. Most impressive is the villain Diamond, who seems to be able to cover himself in a crystal-like stone, giving him high defensive and offensive capabilities. Bruiser seems to have a strength enhancer, while Pyro, we know, has the quirk Flame Fists. Alone they would be tough, but together we see in the video that even pros could fall. Tamayo nodded. Indeed we do, but then came the 2 individuals who changed the outcome of what looked to be a terrible tragedy in the making. First is the young man, Midoriya Izuku, followed by the heiress to the Yaoyorozu family, Yaoyorozu Momo, both first-year students in UA's hero course. The screen played the footage of the 3 villains noticing the students and starting to attack. Momo using the net launcher while Izuku met Bruiser with a shield in a powerful clash. Truly terrible that villains would focus on children like this. sneered Tamayo as the footage played and the villains clearly focusing on Midoriya. What can you tell us about the students, other than that they were impressive in their response time? She asked Masao. He grimaced and pulled his tie loose. Why yes, well, Ms. Yayarosa seems to be able to create all sorts of items from her body, as later when going to rescue and evacuate people from the burning buildings she created fire extinguishers, and here we see her making a net launcher. I can't tell the specifics, but she seems to use her body as the fuel to create the tools she uses. We can expect great things from her as she possesses a quirk with seemingly limitless possibilities. As he finished, he turned to Midoriya and his face became distraught and a bead of sweat rolled down the side of his face. Now Mr. M. Midoriya. He is strong? He said unsurely as the video showed him and Bruiser meeting with a shockwave. But he made that shield similarly to Ms. Yayarosa. I can say that he has excellent deductive skills, recognizing that the villains are after him, then leading them away W with speed that W would suggest an enhancer Q quirk. The video showed the short but incredibly intense 3-on-1 battle between Midoriya and the villains. It paused when Izuku changed his shield to a gauntlet. What do you make of this? Asked Tamayo as she gestured to the new weapon. His quirk seems to be able to create and change things? He made that shield or summoned it, but now it's a gauntlet. Is such a thing possible? Masao scratched his face roughly. He may have a quirk that can create or form weapons from materials he has on hand that we can't see. He gulped. As well as a quirk that gives him heightened physical ability? I am not as sure what to make of this however, he said as he blocked the fire and started snuffing it out as it touched the shield. Is there a metal that can put out flames on touch? Asked Tamayo with an impressed look on her face. Or maybe his quirk allows him to make and unmake, and he is unmaking fire. Would that be the case? I don't know, shouted Masao while throwing his hands into the air with a wild look in his eyes, making Tamayo jump. The footage moved to Midoriya stopping the fire attack and molding it into a massive fireball before snuffing it out. I mean, what even is that? Shouted Masao. The footage showed Midoriya blasting pyro with the air cannon. He either has like 7 quirks or some serious fuckery is going on, he shouted while pulling off his tie. Mr. Masao! We're live! She shouted before regaining her composure. Surely you can tell us something. Masao laughed wildly. He can make things, is strong, durable, manipulate fire, air, even water, and now he made lightning in his palms. Fuck you and fuck him! None of this makes sense, he shouted before getting up. Spent my whole life researching quirks, yet I can't even. Where are you going? Shouted Tamayo after recovering from his outburst. Masao turned around and threw his hand up. I don't know, but I need a drink. The next thing they heard was Masao slamming the door behind him. Tamayo, now very flustered, shuffled her papers. Well, yes, I suppose that is all the time we have tonight. We apologize for the behavior of our senior quirk analyst, yes. The feed cut, and some commercials started to play. Izuku, who had been watching on his phone, groaned. Great, I'm famous, he said before laughing. That was pretty funny though. The train ride to UA went about as well as could be expected. Everyone who noticed him started asking him questions. People pointed at him, some younger kids asked for his autograph, which was surreal. Before he got to his stop for UA, some middle schoolers approached to ask him questions, making him struggle to keep his face from turning red. What's your quirk? It was so awesome in the video, asked a younger teen with an excited grin, everyone around him looking uninterested in his answer. Yeah. How'd you do all that? Asked another teen bouncing up and down. Izuku rubbed the back of his head. Well, I trained very hard and anything is possible with enough heroism, he said lamely before rushing off the train towards UA. In the distance he noticed that there were some construction crews in the area where the villain attack was. He utilized his alchemy to make his UA uniform less noticeable and have a hood until he reached the campus. Once UA was in sight, he changed it back to his normal uniform and walked onto campus. If he thought that students in a hero school would treat him differently than the public after an event like that, then he would be disappointed. Many were giving him looks as he walked through campus, some pointed and whispered as he passed by. He was approached by a small group of third years. There was a tall, muscular blonde leading the trio. He had a cartoonish face and small blue eyes with an easygoing smile on his face. Next to him was a dark-haired boy with pointy ears and a nervous look on his face as he stared at the ground trying to avoid the coming conversation. Last was a girl with very long blue hair and a wide smile on her face as she bounced on her heels excitedly. Heya! The blonde greeted with a large smile on his face. You're that first year that was all over the news. Midoriya, right? Before Izuku could respond, the girl in the group began to rapid-fire questions. You're Midoriya Izuku? What's your quirk? Can you make things like that shield and change them? What about with the fire? How are you so strong? Is it from training? R-. She was stopped by the blonde putting a hand on her shoulder. Nijire, give him a second to breath. She pouted at the blonde. But I need to know, Mirio. Mirio smiled at Midoriya. I just wanted to say that I was really impressed with your moves. We'll have to spar sometime. Oh. I'll tell Sir about you. Not that he wouldn't have heard about you by now. Tamaki. Wanna say something to Midoriya? Offer him some words of wisdom as his senior. Midoriya turned to the third person of the group who was looking at the ground with, if Izuku was honest, a constipated look on his face. Be strong, he mumbled. If he were honest, Izuku could probably put that in his top 10 list of most helpful advice. Short, sweet, and to the point. He gave the older teen a nod of gratitude. Thanks, said Izuku before turning to Nijire. My quirk is a precise form of telekinesis. Yes, I can, also yes, and training with my quirk. Nijire gave him a huge smile while Mirio laughed. Well, we should let you go. I'll keep an eye on you during the sports festival. With that said, the three of them rushed off toward their class and left Izuku. Most of the students continued to give him looks as he made his way to Class 1A's homeroom. Upon entering, he was rushed by everyone. Midoriya! Shouted what sounded like the whole class. He waved at them sheepishly and noticed Momo in the back sigh in relief. Obviously, she was getting grilled before he got here. Dude, that was so manly! Especially that move dash! Shouted Kirishima as he pulled both arms back with Kaminari and Ishido mimicking him. Palm strike! Shouted all three of them, making him blush in embarrassment. Midoriya, you know Ryo is going to want you to come by the dojo today to tell him about it, said Kaminari with a grin, knowing that the martial artist is going to grill him on his quirk and his lack of using it during their training. Also, I see you took inspiration from me with that last move, he said with a finger gun. Izuku rolled his eyes with a groan. Yeah, I'll be sure to give him a visit after class today, he said while ignoring the last part. Uraraka slammed into him and began to shake him back and forth. That was so nerve-wracking. I watched the video like 20 times. Are you okay? Who were they? Why were they after you? Ida rushed forward. Uraraka! Give Midoriya some space, he chastised, and Izuku felt like he could kiss him. Now, Midoriya, please explain to the class everything about the attack. Izuku retracted his former feeling. Seeing everyone barely holding their questions back, he sighed and nodded. I don't know who they are beyond their villain names. I do know that they were after me specifically, he said, getting shocked looks from the class. They said that their boss sent them after me either to kidnap or to test my ability. Bakugo glared at the wall. Who'd you piss of, you nerd? He asked. Izuku frowned in thought. I couldn't tell you. I made sure that very few people knew about my quirk before Yue. Only my mom and a few others knew about it, he said to himself, but everyone heard it. Jiro tilted her head at his words. What do you mean? Why keep it a secret? She asked. Izuku turned to her. My quirk is very dangerous and has nearly limitless possibilities, but I was mostly scared of someone learning what I did to myself. You know, my physical enhancements, or my ability to heal practically anything. At that, the rest of the class nodded in understanding. He could potentially make an army of people as strong as himself, which would be terrifying. Or if there was a supervillain that was extremely weak or injured, he could bring them back to full health. Neither were good. I'm going to look into who the boss is, though, said Izuku with a glare directed at the ground. Whoever they are, they're dangerous, and I'm dash. Before he could finish, he was once again wrapped in Aizawa's capture gear, completely covering his head, silencing him. The rest of the class looked to see their teacher tiredly staring at Izuku, and some giggled at the sight, remembering that he did that after the attack when Izuku was celebrating his victory. Problem child, leave this to the pros, he said with a sigh before releasing him. There are several pros that have already volunteered to investigate this matter. For now, don't be surprised if you see some pros outside of school. They'll be tailing you to see if you get attacked again. Aizawa turned to the rest of the class. As of now, UA's staff has heightened security and are more alert than before. We had the break-in with the media and then attack all on the same day. Rest assured that we are making sure that nothing can go wrong again. The class relaxed after hearing that. After Aizawa finished giving them the updates for their classes, the day began. although they were told that the second half of the day will be a hero class in a different part of campus. Throughout the classes, however, Izuku was thinking of a way that he could start to uncover who was after him. This mysterious boss was powerful enough to send 3 moderately powerful villains after him. Whoever it was had wanted him for something, and for now he'd have to assume it was because of his quirk. Now that he publicly displayed his abilities, he wouldn't be shocked if more people were going to be interested in him going forward. Lunch ended and the class was told to get their hero costumes on if they wanted to use them for the rescue training, and if not to head to the buses. Ida meanwhile was making loud and continuous comments on how they should proceed in an orderly fashion. Naturally, with all his commands, he was the last to arrive at the buses. "Okay everyone," started Ida once he got his embarrassment back under control. "Remember the seating chart I made earlier and please proceed inside the bus." As they got on the bus, they noticed that the seats were less formal, leading Ida to drop his head in embarrassment once again. Izuku took his seat and Uraraka slid in next to him. They gave each other smiles as the rest of class got situated. Once the bus started to move, everyone made idle chat. "Hey Midoriya," said Kaminari, getting everyone's attention. "Those moves yesterday were awesome, man. How much of that was improvised?" "Isn't his quirk super difficult to use?" asked Zero. "I'd guess that he had practiced all of that before." "It looked like he was pretty nervous during the fight. Maybe he was making it up as he went along?" said Kirishima before raising a fist toward Izuku. "Not that you're any less manly for that. You totally kicked ass." Izuku rubbed the back of his head. "Well, other than the fire stuff, I've practiced everything at least once before yesterday. Although the vacuum wave in front of Pyro was something I haven't strictly done before, but I've done similar things on a smaller scale. I must say, Midoriya," started Ida with his typical hand-chopping motion. "As impressive as the battle was, weren't you worried about the laws for quirk use?" Izuku frowned but didn't comment. Tsuyu added her thoughts. "I agree, I apologize, but I usually speak my mind, Midoriya," she said before frowning. "There are laws saying we shouldn't use our quirks on other people, especially to hurt them, and if we do that, we're breaking the law. Wouldn't that make us the same as villains?" She didn't accuse him, but that didn't mean he liked hearing that. Some of the others shouted at her words, saying that he wasn't a villain and was right to defend himself, while most remained silent as they listened. "Not in the slightest," Izuku said with a frown. "Look, that law is all well and good when you're thinking about it in your house or at school. It works on paper, but when you're in a life or death situation, words on a piece of paper weigh a whole lot less." The class didn't have much to say about that, and Tsuyu looked out the window in thought while Ida was nodding to himself. "I'm glad you're alright," Uraraka murmured next to him. "Me too," he said with a small smile. "I wasn't exactly prepared for what happened, but it all worked out. A bit more public than I'd have wanted, though. Now people are talking about me and approaching me." "That reminds me," Hagakure shouted. "Did you know that there were a lot of high-ranking pros talking about you?" she said as she whipped out her phone to show them a few videos. The first video was of an older man. He was covered in black armor and had a long white beard flowing from the bottom of his helmet. It was the number 9 hero, Yoramusha. "What do you think of the video of the attack on the UA student Midoriya Izuku?" asked a reporter while sticking a microphone in the hero's face. He rubbed his beard. "It is as villainous as one can expect when dealing with the dark aspects of our society, to attack a child still in school with the intent to kill. I would like to ask what the school was doing during the battle? It took place less than 3 kilometers from the school and was quite the spectacle. Surely, they aren't that oblivious." In regard to the boy, he has an interesting quirk and is quite capable. "Well, that's the number 9, said Mishiro, his tail hitting the chair next to him in excitement. Kaminari shook his head. "He spent more time criticizing UA than talking about Midoriya." Hagakure nodded, or at least they think she did, and pulled up another video. This time it was of a lesser-known local hero, Death Arms. He was talking to his fans in the street when asked about the incident. "It's always bad when a kid is brought face-to-face with villainy. But he handled himself well enough, not great but good enough for a first year. I was too far to really help, but I arrived toward the end to assist. Shame he got hurt cause the pros weren't around to save him," he said sadly. He went on to comment about his recent cases and what his agency has accomplished in the past week. Izuku gave the video a look that showed how dumb he thought the hero was. "Seriously," he mumbled to himself. "What a crock of shit," said Bakugo as he glared at the seat in front of him. He either didn't watch it or was trying to hype himself up. Either way, it made him look like even more of a pathetic extra. "Well, what you said was a bit mean," Kirishima said, then shrugged. "I can't disagree with you." Some of the others mumbled their agreement. Next video got the attention of all the men on the bus save for Todoroki and Bakugo, who both ignored the video but were listening. It was of the number 6 heroine Miruko, who was giving the camera a massive grin. "Gotta say, if that's what to expect from UA, then I understand why they're the top school. That Midoriya kid has some real talent. Can't say I understand what that quirk of his does, but he's something. I'll be sure to check out the sports festival this year. Maybe some of the other kids are as impressive as he is." "Would you be interested in offering an internship if they impress you?" asked the reporter. "You aren't affiliated with any agency and have never taken a sidekick or intern, but would this change your mind?" Miruko laughed at the question. "Hell no! Just cause I like the kid and think he's got spunk doesn't mean I'm gonna slow down to start teaching. I like going at it solo." With that, she jumped off, leaving the reporter alone. Izuku looked down sad. "I'd deny any other offer if she offered me an internship." Izuku mumbled to himself sadly. All the guys on the bus agreed with a nod. "Seriously?" Jiro asked with a sigh and a shake of her head. Ashido jumped up to grin at her. "Kamen, you got to admit that she's got some killer legs." "I want to be smothered between her thighs," said Kirishima quietly to himself. "Amen," replied all the other guys. Izuku grinned when he heard an almost silent amen from up front where Aizawa was sleeping. Ashido turned to Kirishima with a glint in her eye. "Oh, really?" Kirishima looked away with a blush. "Well, you know." "Guys, there's one more video," said Hagakure before showing them. This time it was Endeavor. He was surrounded by his sidekicks and was glaring at the camera, with his typical personality, no charisma or interest in actually talking. "Are you worried that your son could be targeted? Especially when a relatively unknown student was attacked so close to the school? You are quite infamous to the underworld after all," asked the reporter. In the background, some of the sidekicks grimaced. "My Shoto is more than capable of taking out street trash like in that video," he said with a sneer. "As for that Midoriya brat, he has potential, but the villains that attacked him were garbage, barely worthy of a capable pro's attention to apprehend. I wouldn't be too impressed." With that, he walked away with his sidekicks following after him. "Huh," said Mineta in surprise. "Todoroki, your dad's kind of a dick." Some of the others hissed at him, and Ida was about to reprimand him when Todoroki did something none of them expected. He chuckled. Some of the class exchanged confused glances while the girls gave him a reproving glance now that his face had a different expression other than apathy. "Yes, he is," he said simply with a small, almost unnoticeable smile on his face. "I'm surprised that he didn't talk about UA. He's a former student after all," commented Sato. "You'd think he'd offer some words of encouragement, or something for the staff." "Who knows what he's thinking?" said Siro. Izuku shook his head. "I understand what he's saying, though," he said, getting their attention. "One-on-one I would have torn either of them apart quite fast, even 3-on-1 I took them down in under 5 minutes. To a pro like Endeavor it would have taken a couple flash fire fists and he'd have moved on without fuss. Or have brushed them off to his sidekicks. They're all pretty tough too." Izuku looked over to Todoroki. "Have you sparred with any of Endeavor's sidekicks, Todoroki?" he asked. Todoroki didn't answer for a while, making everyone look at each other strangely. "I have not fought with them," responded Todoroki in his usual monotone. "I have only fought Endeavor for training." While the class gave him surprised looks or questions about how strong the number 2 hero was, Izuku was mentally frowning about how Todoroki called his own father by his hero name, like there was barely a personal relationship at all, much less that of a father and son. It raised a red flag in Izuku's head, one that was right next to the red flag that was Todoroki's refusal to use his fire half and the scar on his face. He'd have to look into that. As a future hero, it was his duty to meddle where people didn't want him to, especially if someone in that situation needed any form of help. For now, Izuku wouldn't push too hard. After all, he has had barely one conversation with the guy, and he might be misreading the situation. Conversations puttered out, and after a few minutes they arrived at their location. It was a massive dome-roofed building. In front of the building waiting for them was All Might and 13, a rescue hero with a space theme that had Uraraka bouncing in her seat in excitement. "Get off the bus," instructed Aizawa. "Do so quietly and quickly, we don't have all day like I wanted." Everyone made their way over toward the 2 heroes. All Might was smiling down at the class in all his glory while 13 was standing at attention next to him. "Welcome, students," greeted 13. This is the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ for short. Today we will be putting you all into various disaster scenarios so that you can see the proper procedure when dealing with a disaster and how to prioritize your actions in such a situation. All Might picked up from there. While fighting villains is the more popular form of heroism, saving people is the true essence of a hero. So today I hope all of you take these lessons to heart so that all of you can be great heroes. Aizawa stepped forward. Once inside we'll split up and go out in groups for each section, he said before leading everyone inside. Once they were through the massive doors, the class looked on in awe of the USJ. There were several different areas spread throughout: a shipwreck zone, one that was on fire, one that looked like it was in the middle of a terrible storm, one that was frozen, a mountain area, and finally a zone that looked like bombs went off. Izuku and the rest of the students walked to the edge of the stairs, while Aizawa moved to stand in front of the class. Now dash! Before Aizawa could begin, All Might surged forward to stand in front of the class. Izuku and the rest of the class turned to see what All Might was staring at. In the center of the fountain area in the center of the USJ there was a massive purple swirling cloud. Izuku instantly recognized it as the warp quirk that was used yesterday. Villains! Izuku muttered, getting a few gasps from around him. From the purple warp gate, the man that infiltrated the school yesterday stepped out, only this time he was covered in severed hands, one of which was covering his face. After he stepped out of the portal, dozens upon dozens of villains followed and quickly spread out onto the plaza. Finally the last villain stepped through. It was a massive purple monster whose face had a beak, and its brain was exposed. Its size was actually greater than All Might, but its eyes held no light whatsoever. The warp gate closed and finally the user was revealed, although their head was made of the purple cloud and had glowing yellow eyes in the mass of purple. Izuku popped his neck and grunted. Stay calm, most of them don't look that tough, so we can take them no problem, he said to reassure his classmates, but a large hand clamped down on his shoulder. It was All Might. He was looking at him with his trademark smile. Do not fear, students, everything will be all right, he announced to the class, then turned to the villains in the fountain area and his smile faded. For I am here, he declared, and many of the villains looked between themselves, looking more uncertain than when they arrived. Chapter 9. If you were to ask Izuku about his lot in life, he'd tell you that it was pretty good. He had a loving mother, a distant but loving father, some friends, one of the best quirks in the world, and he wasn't a terrible-looking guy in his own opinion, if a bit plain. That being said, this is my third encounter with villains this week. I mean, what the hell? Izuku mentally screamed. There were nearly 100 villains spreading throughout the USJ and the scary trio in the center. Izuku was somewhat worried about how the day was about to go. That being said, he personally saw to All Might's healing and knew that the man was in a place where he should be able to fight for a few hours today, and, to Izuku's knowledge, there wasn't a villain in the world that could tango with All Might for multiple hours, so they should be all right. Aizawa was readying himself with his capture scarf and goggles while 13 was fidgeting in worry. 13! Shouted Aizawa. Get the students out! Leave it to All Might and I! As Aizawa finished, All Might rushed down the stairs and met the giant purple monster with a loud boom and shockwave. Izuku noticed that the two of them were moving at more or less the same speed, and while All Might had the edge in power, his attacks didn't seem to be doing that much. Come on, everyone! Ordered 13. The class rushed to follow her, but before they could make it 10 steps, the purple warp villain appeared between them and the exit. Good afternoon, he greeted in a deep but polite tone. We are the League of Villains, and our objective today is the murder of the great symbol of peace, as well as the teachers and many of you, he added offhandedly. The class let out shocked gasps while Izuku narrowed his eyes. That was super unoriginal. He didn't know how many villains screamed about being the ones to kill All Might, but it had to be well over 5,000. You're underestimating us, shouted Izuku with a glare. The teachers and my classmates aren't weak. The villain chuckled. Such bravado from a first year. I wonder what you'll do after we kill a few of you. After all, you are but a child. Izuku rolled his eyes. He couldn't have been less impressed so far with the so-called League of Villains. His face must have expressed these thoughts because the villain addressed him directly. Ah, young Mr. Midoriya, he said in a faux-pleased tone. We in the League were very impressed with your display. His voice suddenly became very sinister. We were hoping to get to know you better. He growled and then rapidly expanded his warp body to engulf the whole class and 13. From the age of 12, Izuku began to use his quirk to feel the environment around him. It was a way to constantly train his quirk's control over his area of effectiveness. It allowed his mind to acclimate, sensing the limitless detail of the world around him. It was good with regular things, like cars, or wind, or water, or houses, food, and household appliances. That being said, Izuku's awareness was going haywire. It was like all the atoms around him and in the warp gates were being torn apart and moved, but at the same time connecting far away and staying still but moving. His head was going fuzzy trying to comprehend it, as it became a habit to sense anything new. "I won't let you harm these students!" shouted 13 before unleashing her quirk. Izuku grunted in annoyance. Her quirk was sucking everything into a void-like area and literally destroying everything. His mind was trying to follow the path of what she pulled in, but it was making him feel weird trying to comprehend it. Add in the warp quirk, and it was like his mind was hit by a stun grenade. "I see that rescue heroes aren't quite combat ready," mused the villain before opening another portal behind 13. Izuku knew exactly what was about to happen and tried to reach out to help but grunted in pain as he was still subconsciously trying to understand both quirks. All that came out of his mouth was a groan of pain. "Watch out, 13!" shouted Ida trying to save her, but she didn't notice till it was too late. 13's own quirk tore her back apart, and she was rendered unconscious from the pain. Izuku punched the ground in frustration. He could have saved her. While he was still reeling mentally for his failure, he turned to the villain with a glare. "I'm going to take you down," he growled before standing up and walking forward. He was trying to ignore the pain in his head as he moved. Kirishima took a few steps forward with a hardened fist. "We got your back, Midobro," the others nodding their agreement. "Just make sure he doesn't do something sneaky," said Izuku before rushing forward at his absolute peak speed. With his physical enhancements, he was far faster than most. Capable of the 50-meter dash in well under 3 seconds, and his strength was greater than the average enhancer. With that in mind, he was able to close distance without the villain stopping him. Pushing his focus and quirk to a new limit, he gathered air for a shockwave blast but held it in a bubble in front of his fist and got within a meter of the villain before punching. What followed was a pseudo-Detroit smash that blew away most of the purple warp gate smoke but didn't really affect the villain's physical body. Izuku decided to try something a bit stronger. "Okay then, Sever Dash." Before Izuku could use his next move, Bakugo and Kirishima rushed in front of him to try their hand at fighting the villain. "No, we can't rush him!" shouted Izuku. Bakugo growled and let loose a massive explosion. "Shut up, you damn nerd!" The blast was instantly redirected behind the two heroes in training, launching them into another warp gate, sending them somewhere far from the stairs. Izuku grit his teeth with a scowl. He failed 2 more people. Clenching his fist, he reared back. Unfortunately, before he could do anything, the area was once again engulfed by the purple warp gate smoke, quickly sending everyone to different locations. Izuku grabbed his head in pain, his habit of analyzing everything in microscopic detail biting him in the ass as the process of warping was sending too many contradicting stimuli to his brain thousands, millions of times over. Before he knew it, he was dropped on the ground in the plaza where Aizawa was slowing, tearing through villains. Around him were various villains, some whose quirks were obvious and some who just looked like ordinary criminals ready to pounce. "So, the NPC has returned," the same guy from the break and said. This time he was covered in severed hands. "I wanted to kill you, but I have to bring you with us. I hate retrieval quests. So tedious," he growled. Izuku was about to respond when a massive shockwave washed over them, some of the villains staggering under the wind. It was from All Might blasting the beast into the air at immense speeds. Before it hit the roof of the USJ, a purple warp gate caught it and launched it back at All Might, who met it with another punch. "So, All Might is the better of the two, but he can't put it down for some reason," mused Izuku. "If he's double-teamed by that beast and the warp villain, he may be beaten." It wasn't likely, but the warp gates would add several unpredictable variables to worry about. "That is the idea," the hand villain said with a pleased tone. "The symbol of peace is much stronger than he should be by our estimates, but we were prepared for everything." Izuku glared at the villain before rushing forward toward the supposed leader of the League of Villains. He was intercepted by a warp gate and sent tumbling in the center of several villains further away. "The villain that knocks him out and brings him to me gets a 10 million yen bounty," shouted the hand villain gleefully. All of the villains around him shared competitive looks and laughed before rushing forward ready to claim their winnings. Izuku glared at them but took a deep breath instead of charging in recklessly. He needed a way to neutralize the warp gates. Luckily, some test subjects were dropped in front of him. The first villain got close and tried to stab him, but Izuku gave him a strong punch to the chin, instantly knocking him out before grabbing his arm and throwing him at another villain, sending them both tumbling. 3 villains, 2 of which didn't have any noticeable mutations from quirks and a third who had metal fists, rushed forward with war cries. Izuku narrowed his eyes and met the first villain in a flash. The man didn't have a way to react fast enough to stop Izuku's fist to his stomach. Force! Mentally commanded Izuku. The blow was delivered with roughly 80% of his strength, which was enough to stop him in his tracks, but the follow-up woke him and caused him to scream in pain. Not enough, not focused enough. Izuku mentally chastised himself. Then he turned to the next 2 who were almost upon him with furious looks on their faces. Izuku ducked under a metal-encased fist and leaned back from a finger jab from the next villain, whose fingers became spikes. Not giving them time to continue their attacks, Izuku punched the spiked finger villain in the same way as the last villain. The man passed out from the strength but only grunted from the follow-up attack. Too weak and bad timing, good focus. The last villain roared and tried to attack him with a barrage of metal fists. Izuku ducked and weaved through the attacks while mentally focusing. The man overextended with a punch, allowing Izuku to get in close and land another punch on the man's stomach. The blow knocked the man unconscious, then the follow-up caused a deep indentation in the man's stomach and chest, destroying the man's stomach and cracking every bone in his torso. It would be months of rehabilitation, but it was the outcome Izuku had been working on. Perfect. Izuku thought with a clenched fist. The attack was simple, a physical attack followed by an impact of force from his quirk. It was like a solid wall of energy that attached to all the atoms at the point of impact and around it, that carried the momentum of his punch. Too much power and not enough focus, and the attack didn't do any true damage. Too little power, and it didn't do anything. It relied on the fact that he can't move something over his limit, like a human torso, but the momentum of his attack slammed into them, doing massive damage. This was an attack he thought up after getting a better look at the warp villain. He didn't seem to have a physical body for the most part, so he needed a way to attack him, otherwise he would be invincible. Hopefully it will be enough. A villain was thrown past him and another charged him from behind. Izuku spun around and swiped his hand at the man. Sever, thought Izuku. The villain's chest opened from a large slash that wasn't even a millimeter deep. It was so sudden and painful that the villain screamed, abandoning his attack. Izuku picked up a small rock with his quirk and bashed the man in the head with it, knocking him out. Sometimes a simple usage of his quirk was enough. Problem child, report, said Aizawa in hero mode. He was panting slightly and scuffed up, but no real injuries. His capture weapon was coiled and ready to attack with the slightest twitch. Izuku would have to get a close look at that thing one day. The warp villain incapacitated 13 and separated the class into the USJ. They are interested in me and sent me here, though these losers are less of a threat than the 3 I fought yesterday. 2 more villains rushed them, one clearly a mutant quirk as he was large and had animal-like features. The other got within 5 meters and Aizawa cancelled whatever their quirk was and slammed him face first into the ground, taking them out. Izuku reared his fist back and hit the animal mutant with a force punch. The attack was dealt with 70% strength, and the subsequent attack was delivered in less than 1,000th of a second after, and shattered all the villain's ribs instantly. I'm worried about All Might, Izuku said while smashing his small rock over another villain's head. The warp quirk villain is too tricky to beat with a normal punch, no matter how strong. Aizawa flowed through the attacks of a villain, then taking them out with a knee to the nose. Don't worry about that, focus on the fight. These villains may be subpar, but it only takes one mistake. Izuku kicked away a villain before jumping next to Aizawa. Immediately after, a massive shockwave erupts next to them, followed by All Might landing next to Aizawa, panting slightly. I have the beast beaten, but between its regeneration and the warp villain I'm having a bit of trouble, grunted All Might before he noticed Izuku and jumped in shock. Young Midoriya, what are you doing here? Aizawa jumped forward. No talk time, plan now. They want to kidnap me, but they suck at it, answered Izuku while gesturing to the unconscious villains. Izuku then lowered himself in a ready stance. Leave the warp villain to me. Such big words from the child soldier, the hand villain said with a giggle. Tell me, what is the difference between us, HM? We both use our quirks for violence, and we both fight for what we believe in. Why am I the bad guy here? That's what's wrong with this world, because of labels like hero and villain dash. Shut up! Shouted all 3 of the heroes/hero student. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, Izuku said in a deadpan. We came here to learn rescue maneuvers, you're here for murder. You are clearly the bad guy. I see you figured me out. he growled with a small giggle. The warp villain appeared next to the hand villain with the monster following out of the portal, looking now worse than when it arrived. Tamura Shigaraki, the Nomu is no match for All Might, but he has no way to put it down. Also, I believe that several students were able to escape while I was assisting the Nomu, informed the warp villain. Tamura giggled. Who cares about the students, since we'll win by killing All Might? Nomu has unlimited stamina. Kurojairi assists Nomu in killing All Might. I'll deal with these two. He started rushing forward with surprising speed. Nomu killed them all. In an explosion of movement that Izuku couldn't follow, All Might met the Nomu in the middle with a thunderous crash. Both of their arms blurring due to the speed of their punches. After barely a second of fighting, the Nomu was blasted across the USJ. It was then that the warp villain moved and Tamura arrived. Beside him were the remaining villains that were rushing him and Aizawa from all sides. Izuku created as much water as he could and splashed it on all of the villains he could manage before freezing it. It wouldn't hold any of them in place, but it would slow them down and hinder movement. Aizawa was a hurricane of movement and acrobatic maneuvers, grappling the closest villain and throwing him at another. Izuku went to intercept Tamura, but he was ambushed by two villains before he could. Izuku leaned under a kick and grabbed the leg, focusing inside. Izuku used Sever to cut all the muscle tendons in the villain's leg before throwing him at the other villain, who managed to scramble out of the way. Immediately he followed up with a jab to the villain's chin that knocked him out. Looking over, he noticed that Aizawa was having trouble with the multiple opponents and moved to help. Making another air blast, he knocked everyone off balance, allowing Aizawa to gain distance. Kurojairi! Shouted Tamura suddenly. With no order or discernible movement to let the warp villain in on his plan, Izuku was hit by the overload of awareness once again, but this time it was a small portal that opened up in front of him, and before Izuku could comprehend it, he was hit in the face by a massive purple fist, knocking him across the plaza. Still conscious, Izuku took stock of his injuries. His jaw was cracked slightly, easy fix. He was bleeding from his nose, cheek, forehead, and was very dizzy. But he didn't have time to worry about it. He quickly jumped to his feet and was hit by the same sensory overload. This time he dove to the side and spun to punch the smoky warp gate with an atomic force punch. In the distance he heard a painful grunt, signifying that it was a successful hit. Izuku took slow, deep breaths as he overcame the pain of the warp gate and the hit from the Nomu and tried to re-enter the fight to assist Aizawa, who was noticeably slowing down. Izuku and Aizawa slowly closed distance towards each other, Izuku because his teacher was slowing down either because he took hits or quirk usage, and Aizawa because he didn't want to leave a student on their own surrounded by villains while he was able to help. Two villains remained besides the main three. Aizawa made quick work of his while Izuku bashed the other over the head with a small rock. Booms and shockwaves sounded in the distance as All Might beat the hell out of the Nomu, who would instantly bounce back or was warped back into the fight, no worse for wear. This won't end while the warp villain and Shigaraki are in play, commented Aizawa while retracting his capture weapon. We can take out Shigaraki and hopefully end this. Izuku nodded. I take it you want me to stay back? He asked. Aizawa didn't bother to speak before rushing towards Shigaraki, who cackled as he met him in combat. A slowed Aizawa was surprisingly even with Shigaraki, who was without precise technique but had a ferocity that allowed him to fight on somewhat even terms with his teacher. Although with the erasure quirk in play, the fight was short, and Shigaraki was pile-drived into the ground with monumental force. Izuku shook his head. None of these villains were dangerous on their own. Until Izuku grunted in pain, but, this being the fifth time he was subjected to the warp quirk, he was able to fight through it and remain aware. Aizawa, on the other hand, didn't have an awareness, and was taken down by the warped-in Nomu. He was slammed onto the ground with tremendous force, making Izuku wince as he rushed forward. The more he moved, the more pain his head was in as the warp smoke remained in the area. Kurojairi, if Izuku was remembering his name right, retracted his warp smoke, thinking Izuku was going to attack him, but he was aiming for the Nomu. The regeneration and shock absorption parts of the monster meant that couldn't hold back. He reared back for a right-handed punch as he got within range. He needed full power. All of his strength was put into this punch, and was followed by a near-instantaneous attack on an atomic level less than a thousandth of a second after initial impact. The Nomu's head exploded in a shower of gore that terrified Izuku. But he pushed that down for a moment as he picked up Aizawa and jumped away to gain distance, as he could see that Nomu was slowly recovering. Laying his teacher down, he forced away the bile that threatened to come up at the state of his teacher. His face was broken, every bone on the right side of his face was cracked and damaged, blood gushing from open wounds, and though his eye was thankfully intact. Not having much time, Izuku slowly fixed the bleeding while mentally promising to heal him when this was all over. Turning around, he noticed that Nomu was standing unnaturally still in the place he was hit, no brain activity or awareness in its stillness. It was then that Izuku realized the Nomu was completely dependent on orders to act, and Shigaraki was the one barking out orders. The last order was for it to kill All Might, meaning that it should fight until All Might is dead. But it isn't moving. Matter of fact, after All Might's big hit earlier, Shigaraki gave it another order. Any damage to its brain means that it needs another order because the damage erased the last order. It's so mindless that it needs constant orders to operate. Izuku realized in a flash before taking off at his maximum speed toward the monster. Before he even made it halfway, he was assaulted by the warp quirk and dove to the side to avoid whatever was going to come out of it. It was a pale arm, then the familiar form of Shigaraki, who was breathing heavily. Not wasting time, Izuku rushed Shigaraki with the beginnings of a plan in his head. As he expected, Nomu came forward to defend its master, must be instinctually programmed to defend Shigaraki, thought Izuku. Izuku landed another full-powered atomic force punch, but this time it was to the chest, leaving a hole through its massive body. Shigaraki roared and swiped at Izuku, who leaned out of the way and punched him in the face before grabbing his extended arm and spun around him to get behind while pulling the arm behind him. Nomu was on him in an instant, and from behind him a warp gate opened. Izuku smirked. They wanted the Nomu to punch him through the barrier to send him far away or to somewhere dangerous while heavily injured from the hit. With Nomu's speed and strength, it was a good plan thought up in the heat of battle. That is, if Izuku hadn't expected this and was caught flat-footed. But he wasn't. So, he threw Shigaraki through the warp gate and hardened both of his arms to take Nomu's hit. He heard an angered growl from Kurojairi in the distance, who quickly warped Shigaraki back. Izuku mentally laughed when he saw the villain's clothes were on fire. As Kurojairi and Shigaraki recovered and planned, this was his chance to momentarily subdue the Nomu. The Nomu didn't let up its assault, and Izuku didn't expect it to, so he raised his right arm in a chopping motion. When he was training his quirk to enhance himself over the years, he needed to practice pinpoint controls so that he could manipulate himself without mistake. So, he practiced dozens of different little exercises to fine-tune himself. They gave birth to very deadly techniques that he would never use in normal circumstances. But seeing as how he was against a mindless regenerator, he didn't feel he needed to hold back. Honestly, he destroyed its head and it got back up 10 seconds later, so this wasn't even going to be lethal. The first technique was Sever. It was used during his enhancement procedures and All Might's recovery procedure. It was a slashing motion that was at the very best a millimeter thick, but it could cut anything without fail. Not much use here. The second was an accidental discovery when practicing Sever. He called it Cleave. Similar to a meat cleaver that can completely cut meat in a single stroke no matter the size or type. Cleave can cut anything in two, a diamond or a building. Granted, a building would take longer due to his quirk's limitations, it was nonetheless true. Izuku waited until the last possible moment before bringing his arm down, bisecting the Nomu from brain to crotch. Without hesitation, Izuku created 5 kilograms worth of nitroglycerin, thank you Bakugo, and covered the two halves before making a small spark, blowing it up. The explosion made the two halves into smaller chunks that Izuku diced with Cleave to make even smaller. Right as he was done, a warp gate opened in front of him, catching him off guard, and without the mental prep of knowing the warp quirk was coming, he was tagged in the shoulder by Shigaraki's hand, which caused him to scream in pain as his suit and skin were decayed. The pain of the quirk and the presence of the warp quirk's smoke made it hard for him to counterattack, so he jumped back to put distance between them while mending his shoulder. His hero's suit was complete destroyed from his shoulder down, and lots of skin was decayed off of his shoulder, causing lots of blood to flow from the open wound. Izuku held back the tears of pain as he quickly mended the surface injury to slow the bleeding. He was barely aware that Shigaraki and the warp quirk villain were talking when the dome of the USJ were hit by something that then crashed onto the ground several meters away, getting the attention of the villains. Izuku's awareness told him it was All Might, who didn't seem to have any outstanding injuries. All Might was by his side before Izuku could notice. He knelt down and silently appraised Izuku's injuries. "I'm so sorry, young Midoriya," he said in a quiet voice. "The warp villain sent me into the upper atmosphere. I've been stuck falling this whole time," he said with a grimace. "I've momentarily took out the Nomu, but I can sense that it is slowly coming back," Izuku said with a grunt of pain as moving his jaw to talk hurt. "It is incapable of aggression or even movement without orders, so separating it from Shigaraki, the hand villain, will render it harmless." All Might stood and clenched both of his fists. "Truly, young Midoriya, you are an incredible young man. With this information I will finish this once and for all. Before All Might could rush off, Izuku spoke. Shigaraki can decay anything he touches with his hands. I'm guessing the longer he touches the more damage it does. All Might nodded and blasted forward. Since the Noma was still regenerating, All Might was able to close distance and smash Shigaraki in the face before he could react or Kurogyri could intercept. The villain was sent flying from the blow, and instantly All Might was behind Kurogyri but was forced to block a punch from the now recovered Noma. Izuku knew that All Might would be forced into a stalemate if Kurogyri was still in play, so Izuku took a deep breath and rushed forward as fast as he could manage. All Might and Noma meeting each other in a clash of fists. Every so often a fist from the Noma would be warped into All Might's blind spot, getting a grunt from the man. As he closed distance, his head started hurting as the warp smoke was within his field of awareness. Every step was painful, and once he was within reach of Kurogyri, Izuku's nose started to bleed from the strain. Izuku grit his teeth and bit back the tears of pain as he hit Kurogyri's stomach with an atomic force punch, getting a scream of pain as his smoky body was launched across the plaza. Excellent, young Midoriya! Cheered All Might before gritting his teeth and redoubling his efforts on the Noma. Izuku fell on his butt in exhaustion and didn't even react when All Might hit Noma so hard it was blasted through the roof of the USJ and into the clouds. Knowing that with the Noma gone the fight was pretty much over, letting Izuku fell back in relief. I need a vacation, thought Izuku before blacking out. Chapter 10. Izuku fell to the ground, with a small amount of relief filling his body as Kurogyri was taken out of the fight long enough for All Might to hopefully send the Noma away. He vaguely heard shouting, then a crash, but after a while he felt wind in his hair as he was moved somewhere else. Izuku didn't know what happened or how long he was out, but he was somewhat aware that it had been a while. But he didn't fully relax. There was a real threat that seemed unstoppable. The Noma couldn't die, and there could be even more of them. The Noma was strange, pondered Izuku. It was capable of such a high level of regeneration. He even made a point of destroying the brain, which was the default way to deal with regenerators, yet it pulled itself back together moments later. He was too focused on fighting that he didn't get a chance to really investigate it as he was fighting, but it didn't feel like a healing power. More along the lines of undoing or reversing. Shigaraki labeled it super regeneration. Well, why would he tell the truth? Thought Izuku. Better yet, how was such an unstable individual able to organize and lead an operation that can produce such a monster? I don't think the many scientists needed to do something like that would follow a homicidal brat like him. Throwing out the idea that it was regeneration, and it was something like reverse or undo, it still didn't change the fact that he destroyed the brain, and it didn't die. Furthermore, the Noma's brain capabilities weren't that inspiring. It had the need to be told an order every couple of minutes, or if it was seriously injured. Was there an issue with the brain? Were there trade-offs for the high level of artificial powers? Was this the best they could make, or only the first iteration? Would future Noma be worse, or was this the peak? What did you see, Izuku? The Noma needed constant orders. The Noma was incredibly strong, easily stronger than any enhancer bearing All Might. Faster too, its durability wasn't that bad either, even without the shock absorption. Going off that, and the handyman's crazed words and bragging, I can assume that the Noma was artificially made or altered with multiple quirks. Strength, speed, shock absorption, regeneration, and maybe more I couldn't see. All of which were more than strong enough to be a quirk on their own. The thought of someone possessing multiple quirks, either through science or something else, was troubling. Although for now he would just roll with it. The Noma, by his own estimates, was too unique to be something that was one of many. If there were more Noma, then they'd be different, or it would be a long time before another like the one that attacked UA. I hope they'll let me look at it. If I can get an uninterrupted minute to scan it, then I'll know what I'm dealing with. For now, it's all speculation and hypothesis. I need to learn more. Who knows what'll happen if the next Noma is worse. Izuku's mind slowed, which was odd since he was still unconscious, but he was slowly losing his lucidity. Like his brain needed to nap. Izuku's eyes shot open, and he was met with the familiar sight of the UA infirmary. Thankfully, he was the only occupant, so he wouldn't have to deal with talking for the moment. The clock on the wall read just after 5 p.m., so either he was out for over a day or just a few hours. He would bet on the latter since he was more mentally exhausted than injured. Turning his head to look down, he was hit by blinding pain. Pushing through the agony of scanning his body, he took in just how injured he was. Bruised organs, cracked ribs, broken arm, several lacerations and contusions, and his shoulder was messed up from the handyman's quirk. He would estimate that he lost about 1/3 of his blood, which would explain his dizziness and the pain with using his quirk at the moment. Which would explain the 4 to his left. All in all, he was more injured than he'd ever been. To think he was this hurt even with all the enhancements he'd painstakingly gave himself. Hopefully he could recover enough to heal himself in a little while so he could continue to investigate the Nomu. After a while the doors opened. The first through the door was Recovery Girl. She wasn't surprised to see him awake and moved over to his bedside. "You came to the same conclusion I did, it would seem," she said while adjusting the 4. "Due to the intense focus you require for your quirk, the effects of blood loss will hinder you quite a bit." Izuku nodded. "Yeah, I was just going to wait before fixing myself up. How is everyone? Is the Nomu still a threat?" "The worst of it were Bakugo and 13. Both will recover fully in a day or two," she said before looking at him sternly. "And don't you worry about that Noma. Understood?" Izuku's right hand clenched, but he nodded. "Good," she said with a nod. "You can go in now," she said to people outside as she left. In walked 4 more people, deflated All Might, a heavily bandaged Aizawa, Principal Nizu, and finally the detective he'd met before, Tsukachi. "Glad you're up. Are you okay, young Midoriya?" asked All Might. Izuku didn't bother answering. "I think I have a theory on the Nomu. Although, I hope that with Kurogyri taken down you were able to take the Nomu out of the fight?" he said to All Might. All Might gave Izuku a somewhat strained grin. "I did, although I must thank you. Without your actions the battle would have been far more troublesome." Izuku waved him off. "If Kurogyri hadn't kept bringing Nomu back to the fight you would have won in a couple of seconds. Honestly, you had it handled, they were just fighting smart. Or Kurogyri was at least. He was certainly dangerous, especially his spatial awareness." Nizu jumped to stand on the end of the bed. "We heard that they were interested in you, can you tell us any more?" Izuku sighed. "It's not that important, they didn't single me out till I spoke up and fought. But Kurogyri recognized me, likely cause of that video, and said they were impressed and wanted to get to know me more." The 4 of them silently took that in. "I actually want to ask a question to you all," said Izuku, getting their attention while fidgeting his hand slightly. "If you have it in custody, can I run some scans on the Nomu? I wasn't in the right headspace during the fight to really get a good look at it. I have some theories I've worked out, but I need to confirm them. It would make it so if another Nomu shows up or this one attacks again, somehow we can take it down better." The pros exchanged looks while the detective narrowed his eyes, then took out a notepad. "May I hear your theories?" "First is that the Nomu was an artificially created being. I will say either from the corpse or willing test subject as the base. The body tissue was too real to be artificial. I know the feel of body tissue, and there are some things you can't fake. It may be artificial, but it had a real human base in there." The 4 of them looked a bit unsettled by that, although he couldn't really tell with Aizawa's bandages and Nizu's poker face. He continued, "Shigaraki was quite talkative about it, saying that it had super strength, shock absorption, and super regeneration. All of them top-tier level quirks, but its regeneration didn't make sense." Izuku clenched his fist and took a few strained breaths before continuing. "I used a variety of lethal techniques on the Nomu, yet it would always recover. I used my atomic force punch to destroy its head and chest cavity. I used cleave to make it mincemeat. I even doused it in 5 kilograms worth of nitroglycerin before blowing it to Kingdom Come. Nothing stopped it. Regeneration stems from the brain. That is something that has been confirmed in studies on people with Regan quirks. But it would stay down." Tsukachi was taking notes with frown. All Might looked a bit unsettled and nervous, and his fists were clenched tightly, while Aizawa was looking at the ground. Nizu gave him a curious look. "Tell me about the lethal techniques you used." Izuku looked at him curiously. "I was about to give my theory on the Nomu. You told us that there was a human base to the Nomu, so we need to hear more about these techniques and why you had to use them. What was the situation?" further explained Nizu softly. Izuku frowned and suddenly felt anxiousness overtake him. "Why is this a big deal? I have a theory on the Nomu. We should focus on that, it's too important to ignore," he cried with frustration building in him. Aizawa put a hand on Izuku's shoulder. "Taking a life is always the last resort, and it's never easy," he said strongly. "Sometimes it's unavoidable, but being able to make those decisions is very important for a pro hero. It's okay, I believe you were acting in the most logical manner anyone in that situation could." Izuku took in a shaky breath before All Might continued softly. "But you never should have been in that situation, young Midoriya. We failed you." He shook his head rapidly. "The villains were after me, so I had to fight them. I mean, it isn't like you all did something wrong. But we did, Nisa said sadly. One of our students was forced to make decisions that most pros would hesitate to. He did it with the mindset that no one was going to save him, and he was the only one who could fight. Worse yet, spoke Tsukachi suddenly. It seems that even in the hours you were unconscious, you were still thinking on how to stop the Nomu or future Nomu. It's the first thing you said to us. Izuku was about to speak when Aizawa squeezed his shoulder. It's okay. He met Aizawa's eyes with a worried look. You're safe now. The words echoed in his ears before they sunk in. A breath he didn't know he'd been holding had finally been let out. The tension in his muscles finally relaxed. His hands no longer fidgeted in place. He saw the tears before he felt them, small drops falling onto his hands. He took deep breaths to try and calm down, but they kept falling. I didn't think I was this stressed, said Izuku while wiping his face. Tsukachi spoke first. It's something that happens when someone is in a high-stress situation, especially if it is the first time. Your mind and body were still in fight mode. I could tell this whole time, you were too antsy and level-headed for someone who had gone through something like that. Cops and pros learn to cope with the stress of life or death situations over time and with help. You're less than a month into UA. I would have been more surprised if you actually were fine, he said gently. Izuku didn't say anything, but he just nodded with a frown on his face. I don't want you even thinking of coming back to class for at least 4 days, Aizawa said sternly. You've done far more than enough. Take some time with your loved ones and calm down. Nizu agreed immediately. Furthermore, I want you to understand that while incredibly helpful, your actions should not have happened. You're our student, and until you have a pro license, it is our job to keep you safe. Izuku could only nod in response. The 5 of them were quiet for a while as the young hero in training pulled himself back together. None of them were looking away, always sure to give him a look of reassurance whenever he met their gazes. After nearly 10 minutes, Izuku had calmed enough to speak again. Sorry, Dash. Don't apologize, young Midoriya, interrupted All Might. You have nothing to be ashamed about. Izuku took another breath. Right, well, how are my classmates? I know Bakugo was injured. What about everyone else? He asked quietly. Aizawa sighed. Mostly bruises and cuts, nothing Recovery Girl couldn't fix up. Bakugo was the most injured due to his actions of fighting far more villains than anyone else. He and Kirishima took out nearly 24 in the zone they were dropped and then fought off villains from the flood zone and assisted in the conflagration zone. He really stepped up. Bakugo? Thought Izuku in bewilderment. Wow. He muttered. Sounds like him actually. He was always willing to fight anyone who stood against him. Aizawa grunted in annoyance. Both of you fought way past your limits. Thankfully there weren't any villains like Nomu or Shigaraki among the villains throughout the USJ, otherwise this would have been a true tragedy. He said softly, more to himself than Izuku. Izuku took another deep breath. I know I shouldn't worry about it anymore, but I really do have some theories about the Nomu. Aizawa sighed and finally let go of his shoulder. Let's hear it then. Also, please break down the lethal techniques if you can. You aren't in trouble, but as your teachers we want to know what you went through. The only lethal techniques I had to use was cleave, which is a slashing technique that can cut anything. Second is atomic force punch, which is using the momentum from a punch and sending that force directly to the atom's surrounding point of contact. Since I can't move something over my weight limit, it delivers a large amount of force on an atomic level, explained Izuku, and the weight of his actions now that he was calmer made him realize that he really tried to kill someone, and it unsettled him. Even if the Nomu was likely brain dead anyway. He didn't notice the surprised and frankly impressed looks directed at him as he stared at his hands. He continued, the Nomu had regeneration, sorta. He said, getting everyone's attention again. But I specifically destroyed the brain. Which means that it isn't healing to my understanding, as healing and regen quirks stem from the brain. So, I believe that the Nomu was reversing the damage or undoing it in some way. If I could scan it or do some tests, I can really tell you, but based on its capabilities we're either not going to see another one for a long time as they recreate it, or they won't be to this one's level if we encounter more of them soon. Fortunately, I was able to break down its limited mental capabilities mid-fight, which is why I focused on Kurogiri. One is that it can only receive simple orders, for example kill All Might. It would then try to do that. But after a few minutes it would reset and need the order again. Or if its head were injured then it would also need the order again. So, I knew that if Kurogyri couldn't catch it when it was blasted away, then it should be harmless on its own, as it didn't attack me when I destroyed its head until Shigaraki reordered it. Izuku laid back. That's all I could work out for sure. If I had more time with it or had a good scan of it during the battle, I could tell you more. Niza looked thrilled to hear his thoughts while All Might looked stunned. Tsukachi was taking notes, so he could relay this info to others in case more Noma popped up. Again, with the bandages in the way, Izuku couldn't tell what Aizawa was thinking. Wow, young Midoriya, you certainly pulled more insight from that battle than I did, All Might said with a shake of his head. Niza nodded. Indeed you did. With this information we can tackle the coming threat sooner than expected. Crime labs usually take a few weeks to give concrete information. That being said, your part in this is done. Izuku agreed with that. Understood. To be honest, I could use a break. This is the third villain encounter this week for me, he said with a slight laugh. Exactly, interjected Aizawa. So rest up and head home. Your mother was already notified that you were awake and should be on her way. We'll see you in class on Monday. We gave everyone Thursday and Friday off. Parting words were said between the heroes. Tsukachi got a more in-depth report from Izuku, and after a while he was allowed to rest alone and wait for his mother. I didn't think I was that affected by the fight, he thought to himself, but I just couldn't do anything. Attacks that should kill anyone weren't enough. Even All Might would die to cleave. The fear of a monster that could just survive against his worst attacks, and the thought of an organization like the League of Villains being able to make more. It was enough to overwhelm him for a moment there. All Might told him that they were able to take Kurogyri into custody, but not before he warped Shigaraki away. Izuku had tried to get more information, but none of the heroes or Tsukachi would budge on giving him more information than that. Luckily Kurogyri, who in Izuku's mind was the more troublesome foe, was taken into custody. Warped quirks were very rare, and versatile ones like the villain had were even more rare than that. So that was a positive. Ugh, he was too tired to think anymore. He'll sleep till his mom gets here. Izuku, in nearly 10 years, hadn't been where he was right now. When he was younger, he wasn't the most popular kid in school. He was smart, and a hero nerd with a seemingly mediocre quirk, so there wasn't a line to be friends with him. He met people and he wasn't treated badly, but he just didn't have an abundance of friends, especially the one whose house he was currently at. Bakugo Katsuki. He and Izuku were close when they were young, and up until Bakugo got his quirk were friends. Afterwards, when Izuku got his, they drifted. Izuku's weak telekinesis wasn't up to par with explosions, so Bakugo didn't have time for Izuku the extra. That being said, Izuku will be a hero one day, one that saves people with a smile like his idol All Might. So, he couldn't ignore someone he'd known his entire life after hearing that he was injured in the USJ yesterday. That didn't mean he wasn't nervous about knocking on the Bakugo residence front door. Oh well. Knocking a few times, he heard shouting before the door swung open, which let Izuku find out that Bakugo Mitsuki was still very beautiful even after a decade of time. She gasped. Izuku! He was pulled into a hug that was quite tight. It's been so long! I just spoke with your mother about Yue. Come in. He was led inside before he could get a word in. Katsuki! Get down here! She shouted toward the hallway. Here, sit at the table, I'll get you a drink. With that she was gone. Izuku nodded slowly and let out a sigh. This family was as hectic as he remembered. It was clear that Bakugo got quite a bit from his mother, like her loudness. Hell are you doing here? Izuku turned to see a slightly bandaged Katsuki standing in the hallway glaring at him. I wanted to check up on you to see how you were. Recovery girl said that besides me you were the only one that was injured, explained Izuku. A grunt was Bakugo's response before Mitsuki re-entered with a couple of drinks. Sit down, brat, she shouted at him. Don't be rude to someone you've known since diapers. Izuku chuckled at the angry stomps that led Bakugo to the chair opposite him. I can fix you up if you want, asked Izuku while gesturing to Bakugo's bandages. It wouldn't take too long. Bakugo glared at him. If you think I need dash. Katsuki, shouted Mitsuki. Help from you, you damn nerd, then you're dumber than I thought. He finished before glaring at his mother. Izuku closed his eyes and, just to spite Bakugo, proceeded to completely heal him. It was quite easy, most of the damage was on the mend already thanks to Recovery Girl. Well, I'm done healing you anyway, Izuku said with a smile. Mitsuki looked over at him. What do you mean? You didn't do anything but close your eyes for a minute. They nerd lied about his quirk this entire time, growled Katsuki while glaring at Izuku. I won't thank you, he said as he took off his bandages and flexed his arms. Izuku ignored Katsuki, fighting a grin at his full range of motion being returned to him. He turned to Mitsuki. Mom told me not to tell anyone what my quirk was until I was strong enough to keep myself safe, he explained before raising a pointer finger. He proceeded to make a necklace of pure gold and made a small diamond-encrusted fist, barely the size of his pinky nail so it wasn't gaudy, before passing it over to a stunned Mitsuki. I can manipulate and create matter up to 5 kilograms. She looked at the necklace with wide eyes. I can't take something dash. Izuku held up a hand. I haven't seen you in years, think of it as an apology. You're practically my aunt after all. She smiled and pulled him into a hug. Thanks, brat. Katsuki grunted. Stop hitting on my mother, you damn nerd! Izuku's face went scarlet, while Mitsuki whacked him on the head. After recovering from his embarrassment, he turned back to Katsuki with a serious look. I don't know what you've heard about the attack in the plaza, but it was almost a tragedy. He started getting a worried look from Mitsuki and narrowed eyes from Katsuki. The villain, Nomu, was an artificial human made with several quirks. Izuku looked down with a glare at the table. I tried very hard to kill it, he admitted, to the surprise of both of them. Katsuki frowned. Must have been bad for someone like you to go that far. You've always been a softie. How did you kill it? Izuku looked at him. I couldn't. What? Katsuki asked in shock. Mitsuki looked between them in worry and confusion. I don't understand, why is that a shock? If it was made with multiple quirks, it was going to be hard to take down. But I'm glad you didn't have to be the one to do that, Izuku, she said softly at the end. With my quirk, killing someone is scary easy, answered Izuku. I diced it into small pieces, blew its head off, even just severed its head. It didn't stay down. No one said anything for a moment. It wasn't a healing Regan then, Bakugo said with a frown. Must be some kind of altered quirk or something. That's what I thought, nodded Izuku. You fought the most villains, did you hear anything that can give me more information about the League? I want to be prepared for the next time. Katsuki scoffed. None of those extra knew anything other than the target being All Might, and that they were responsible for causing chaos by targeting students. Izuku frowned. They weren't strong, low-level crooks who were brought together last minute, I would guess. Kurojiru was captured, Nomu taken somewhere, and only Shigaraki got away. This means that they won't be active for a while. Unless their group is stronger than what they revealed, added Katsuki. Izuku didn't like the thought that there was more to the League than revealed. After all, if they were after All Might, why hold back? But he couldn't deny that it would make sense. All the more reason to continue improving his quirk. Izuku stood from his seat. Then I think it's time for me to go. I'm glad you weren't too hurt, Bakugo. It was great to see you again, Mitsuki. After saying his goodbyes, Izuku walked home while thinking about his next steps. In the short term, the League was taken care of. They were hit pretty hard and would need a while to regroup. But there was still the issue of the person who sent the 3 villains after him earlier in the week. Kurojiru made it clear they weren't behind that, which meant that there was another faction out there in secret. He was quite capable at static creation and his close quarters capabilities were very capable. Maybe it was time for him to look into chemistry. His quirk could utilize elemental and chemical combinations for devastating effects. One thing was for sure. Next time something nigh unkillable comes at him, he would have countermeasures in place to deal with it. And there you have it, Heroic Minds. Part 2 of our electrifying journey into the What-If universe. Did your mind just explode with possibilities? Mine sure did. A massive shout out to the brilliant mind behind this epic adventure, Blanduzername. So drop a like, leave a comment with your craziest theories, and share this video with your fellow heroes in training. Until next time, stay awesome, stay curious, and keep on adventuring through the multiverse. Peace out.